He came home with nothing but truth, armed with courage and hunted by enemies. David Balfour returns to reclaim his name. But the road to justice is steep, and not every friend can be trusted. Will he win back his birthright, or lose himself in the fight? The end of the journey begins now. Chapter 21, The Flight in the Heather. The hue of Coronachy early as day comes in the beginning of July. It was still dark when we reached our destination, a cleft in the head of a great mountain, with the water running through the midst, and upon the one hand a shallow cave in a rock. Birches grew there in a thin, pretty wood, which a little farther on was changed into a wood of pines. The burn was full of trout, the wood of cushat doves. On the open side of the mountain beyond, whaups would be always whistling, and cuckoos were plentiful. From the mouth of the cleft we looked down upon a part of a moor and on the sea loch that divides that country from Appin, and this from so great a height as made it my continual wonder and pleasure to sit and behold them. The name of the cleft was the hue of Coronachy, and although from its height and being so near upon the sea, it was often beset with clouds, yet it was on the whole a pleasant place, and the 5 days we lived in it went happily. We slept in the cave, making our bed of heather bushes which we cut for that purpose, and covering ourselves with Allen's greatcoat. There was a low concealed place, in a turning of the glen, where we were so bold as to make fire, so that we could warm ourselves when the clouds set in, and cook hot porridge, and grill the little trouts that we caught with our hands under the stones and overhanging banks of the burn. This was indeed our chief pleasure in business, and not only to save our meal against worse times, but with a rivalry that much amused us. We spent a great part of our days at the waterside, stripped to the waist and groping about, or, as they say, guddling for these fish. The largest we got might have been a quarter of a pound, but they were of good flesh and flavor, and when broiled upon the coals, lacked only a little salt to be delicious. In any bedtime Allen must teach me to use my sword, for my ignorance had much distressed him. And I think besides, as I had sometimes the upper hand of him in the fishing, he was not sorry to turn to an exercise where he had so much the upper hand of me. He made it somewhat more of a pain than need have been, for he stormed at me all for the lessons in a very violent manner of scolding, and would push me so close that I made sure he must run me through the body. I was often tempted to turn tail, but held my ground for all that, and got some profit in my lessons, if it was but to stand on guard with an assured countenance, which is often all that is required. So, though I could never in the least please my master, I was not altogether displeased with myself. In the meanwhile, you are not to suppose that we neglected our chief business, which was to get away. "It will be many a long day," Allen said to me on our first morning, "before the redcoats think upon seeking Coronachy. So now we must get word sent to James, and he must find the siller for us." "And how shall we send that word?" says I. "We are here in a desert place, which yet we dare not leave, and unless you get the fowls of the air to be your messengers, I see not what we shall be able to do." "Aye," said Allen, "ye are a man of small contrivance, David." Thereupon he fell in a muse, looking in the embers of the fire, and presently, getting a piece of wood, he fashioned it in a cross, the 4 ends of which he blackened on the coals. Then he looked at me a little shyly. Getting a piece of wood, he fashioned in a cross. "Could ye lend me my button?" says he. It seems a strange thing to ask a gift again, but I own I am laid to cut another. I gave him the button, whereupon he strung it on a strip of his greatcoat, which he had used to bind the cross, and tying a little sprig of birch and another fir, he looked upon his work with satisfaction. "Now," said he, "there's a little clockin, what is called a hamlet in English, not very far from Coronachy, and it has the name of Colisnacoan. There are living many friends of mine whom I could trust with my life, and some that I am no just so sure of. Ye see, David, there will be money set upon our heads. James himself is to set money on them, and as for the Campbells, they would never spare siller where there was a steward to be hurt. If it was otherwise, I would go down to Colisnacoan whatever, and trust my life into these people's hands as lightly as I would trust another with my glove." "But being so," said I. "Being so," said he, "I would as lief they didn't see me. There's bad folk everywhere, and what's far worse, weak ones. So when it comes dark again, I will steal down into that clockin, and set this that I have been making in the window of a good friend of mine, John Breckmacole, a bowman 26 of Appin's. 26, a bowman is a tenant who takes stock from the landlord and shares with him the increase." "With all my heart," says I. And if he finds it, what is he to think? Well, says Alan, I wish he was a man of more penetration, for by my troth I am afraid he will make little enough of it. But this is what I have in my mind. This cross is something in the nature of the crossdairy, or fiery cross, which is a signal of gathering in our clans. Yet he will know well enough the clan is not arise, for there is standing in his window, and no word with it. So he will say to himself, the clan is not arise, but there is something. Then he will see my button, and that was Duncan Stewart's. And then he will say to himself, the son of Duncan is in the heather and has need of me. Well, said I, it may be, but even supposing so, there is a good deal of heather between here and the Forth. And that is a very true word, says Alan. But then John Breck will see the sprig of birch and the sprig of pine, and he will say to himself, if he is a man of any penetration at all, which I misdoubt, Alan will be lying in a wood which is both of pines and birches. Then he will think to himself, that is not so very rife hereabout, and then he will come and give us a look up in Coronachy. And if he does not, David, the devil may fly away with him, for what I care, for he will no be worth the salt to his porridge. Man, said I, drolling with him a little, you're very ingenious, but would it not be simpler for you to write him a few words in black and white? And that is an excellent observe, Mr. Balfour Shaws, says Alan, drolling with me, and it would certainly be much simpler for me to write to him, but it would be a sore job for John Breck to read it. He would have to go to the school for 2-3 years, and it's possible we might be wearied waiting on him. So that night Alan carried down his fiery cross and set it in the bowman's window. He was troubled when he came back, for the dogs had barked and the folk run out from their houses, and he thought he had heard a clatter of arms and seen a redcoat come to one of the doors. On all accounts, we lay the next day in the borders of the wood and kept a close lookout, so that if it was John Breck that came we might be ready to guide him, and if it was the redcoats we should have time to get away. About noon a man was to be spied, straggling up the open side of the mountain in the sun, and looking round him as he came, from under his hand. No sooner had Alan seen him than he whistled. The man turned and came a little towards us. Then Alan would give another peep, and the man would come still nearer, and so by the sound of whistling he was guided to the spot where we lay. He was a ragged, wild, bearded man, about 40, grossly disfigured with the smallpox, and looked both dull and savage. Although his English was very bad and broken, yet Alan, according to his very handsome use, whenever I was by, would suffer him to speak no Gaelic. Perhaps the strange language made him appear more backward than he really was. But I thought he had little goodwill to serve us, and what he had was a child of terror. Alan would have had him carry a message to James, but the bowman would hear of no message. She would forget it, he said in his screaming voice, and would either have a letter or wash his hands of us. I thought Alan would be gravelled at that, for we lacked the means of writing in that desert. But he was a man of more resources than I knew. Searched the wood until he found the quill of a cushat dove, which he shaped into a pen, made himself a kind of ink with gunpowder from his horn and water from the running stream, and tearing a corner from his French military commission, which he carried in his pocket, like a talisman to keep him from the gallows, he sat down and wrote as follows: Dear kinsman, please send the money by the bearer to the place he kens of. Your affectionate cousin, A.S. This he entrusted to the bowman, who promised to make what manner of speed he best could, and carried it off with him down the hill. He was 3 full days gone, but about 5 in the evening of the 3rd, we heard a whistling in the wood, which Alan answered, and presently the bowman came up the waterside, looking for us, right and left. He seemed less sulky than before, and indeed he was no doubt well pleased he got to the end of such a dangerous commission. He gave us the news of the country, that it was alive with redcoats, that arms were being found, and poor folk brought in trouble daily, and that James and some of his servants were already clapped in prison at Fort William, under strong suspicion of complicity. It seemed it was noise on all sides that Alan Breck had fired the shot, and there was a bill issued for both him and me, with £100 reward. This was all as bad as could be, and the little note the bowman had carried us from Mrs. Stewart was of a miserable sadness. In it she besought Alan not to let himself be captured, assuring him, if he fell in the hands of the troops, both he and James were no better than dead men. The money she had sent was all that she could beg or borrow, and she prayed heaven we could be doing with it. Lastly, she said. She enclosed us one of the bills in which we were described. This we looked upon with great curiosity and not a little fear, partly as a man may look at a mirror, partly as he might look into the barrel of an enemy's gun to judge if it be truly aimed. Allen was advertised as a small, pockmarked, active man of 35 or thereby, dressed in a feather hat, a French side coat of blue with silver buttons, and lace a great deal tarnished, a red waistcoat and breeches of black shag, and I as a tall, strong lad about 18, wearing an old blue coat very ragged, an old Highland bonnet, a long homespun waistcoat, blue breeches, his legs bare, low country shoes, wanting the toes, speaks like a lowlander and has no beard. Allen was well enough pleased to see his finery so fully remembered and set down. Only when he came to word tarnish, he looked upon his lace like one a little mortified. As for myself, I thought I cut a miserable figure in the bill, and yet was well enough pleased too, for since I had changed these rags, the description had ceased to be a danger and become a source of safety. Allen, said I, you should change your clothes. Nah, troth, said Allen. I have nae others. A fine sight I would be if I went back to France in a bonnet. This put a second reflection in my mind, that if I were to separate from Allen and his telltale clothes, I should be safe against arrest, and might go openly about my business. Nor was this all. For suppose I was arrested when I was alone, there was little against me. But suppose I was taken in company with a reputed murderer, my case would begin to be grave. For generosity's sake, I dare not speak my mind upon this head. But I thought of it none the less. I thought it all the more, too, when the bowman brought out a green purse with 4 guineas in gold, and the best part of another in small change. True, it was more than I had, but then Allen, with less than 5 guineas, had to get as far as France. I, with my less than 2, not beyond Queensferry, so that taking things in their proportion, Allen's society was not only a peril to my life, but a burden on my purse. But there was no thought of the sort in the honest head of my companion. He believed he was serving, helping, and protecting me. And what could I do but hold my peace and chafe, and take my chance of it? It's little enough, said Allen, putting the purse in his pocket, but it'll do my business. And now, John Breck, if you will hand me over my button, this gentleman and me will be for taking the road. But the bowman, after feeling about in a hairy purse that hung in front of him in a Highland manner, though he wore otherwise a lowland habit with sea trousers, began to roll his eyes strangely, and at last said, Her Nainsail will loss it, meaning he thought he had lost it. What? Cried Allen, you will lose my button. That was my father's before me. Now I will tell you what is in my mind, John Breck. It is in my mind this is the worst day's work that ever ye did since ye was born. And as Allen spoke, he set his hands on his knees and looked at the bowman with a smiling mouth, and that dancing light in his eyes that meant mischief to his enemies. Perhaps the bowman was honest enough. Perhaps he had meant to cheat and then, finding himself alone with 2 of us in a desert place, cast back to honesty as being safer. At least, and all at once, he seemed to find that button and handed it to Allen. Well, and it is a good thing for the honor of the McColls, said Allen, and then to me, Here's my button back again, and I thank you for parting with it, which is of a piece with all your friendships to me. Then he took the warmest parting of the bowman. For, says he, ye have done very well by me, and set your neck at a venture, and I will always give you the name of a good man. Lastly, the bowman took himself off by one way, and Allen and I, getting our chattels together, struck into another to resume our flight. Chapter 22. The Flight in the Heather, the Moor. Some 7 hours incessant, hard traveling brought us early in the morning to the end of a range of mountains. In front of us there lay a piece of low, broken desert land, which we must now cross. The sun was not long up and shone straight in our eyes. A little, thin mist went up from the face of the moorland like a smoke, so that, as Allen said, there might have been 20 squadron of dragoons there, and we none the wiser. We sat down, therefore, in a hollow of the hillside till the mist should have risen, and made ourselves a dish of drammock, and held a council of war. David, said Allen, this is the kittle bit. Shall we lie here till it comes night, or shall we risk it and stave on ahead? Well, said I am tired indeed, but I could walk as far again, if that was all. Aye, but it isn't, said Allen, nor yet the half. This is how we stand. Appin's fair death to us, To the south it's all Campbell's, and no to be thought of. To the north, well, there's no muckle to be gained by going north, neither for you, that wants to get to Queensferry, nor yet for me, that wants to get to France. Well then, we can strike east. East be it, says I, quite cheerily, but I was thinking into myself, oh man, if you would only take one point of the compass and let me take any other, it would be the best for both of us. Well, then east, ye see we have the Muirs, said Alan. Once there, David, it's mere pitch and toss. Out on yon bald, naked, flat place, where can a body turn to? Let the redcoats come over a hill, they can spy you miles away, and the sorrows in their horses' heels, they would soon ride you down. It's no good place, David, and I'm free to say, it's worse by daylight than by dark. Alan, said I, hear my way of it. Appin's death for us. We have none too much money, nor yet meal. The longer they seek, the nearer they may guess where we are. It's all a risk, and I give my word to go ahead until we drop. Alan was delighted. There are wiles, said he, when ye are altogether too canny and wiggish to be company for a gentleman like me. But there come other wiles when ye show yourself a metal spark. And it's then, David, that I love ye like a brother. The mist rose and died away, and showed us that country lying as waste as the sea, only the moorfowl and the peewees crying upon it, and far over to the east, a herd of deer moving like dots. Much of it was red with heather, much of the rest broken up with bogs and hags and peaty pools. Some had been burnt black in a heath fire, and in another place there was quite a forest of dead firs, standing like skeletons. A weary-looking desert man never saw, but at least it was clear of troops, which was our point. We went down accordingly into the waste, and began to make our toilsome and devious travel toward the eastern verge. There were the tops of mountains all round, you are to remember, from whence we might be spied at any moment. So behoved us to keep in the hollow parts of moor, and when these turned aside from our direction to move upon its naked face with infinite care. Sometimes, for half an hour together, we must crawl from one heather bush to another, as hunters do when they are hard upon the deer. It was a clear day again with a blazing sun. The water in the brandy bottle was soon gone, and altogether, if I had guessed what it would be to crawl half the time upon my belly, and to walk much of the rest stooping nearly to the knees, I should certainly have held back from such a killing enterprise. Toiling and resting and toiling again, we wore away the morning, and about noon lay down in a thick bush of heather to sleep. Alan took the first watch, and it seemed to me I had scarce closed my eyes before I was shaken up to take the second. We had no clock to go by, and Alan stuck a sprig of heath in the ground to serve instead, so that as soon as the shadow of the bush should fall so far to the east, I might know to rouse him. But I was by this time so weary that I could have slept 12 hours at a stretch. I had the taste of sleep in my throat. My joints slept even when my mind was waking. The hot smell of the heather and the drone of the wild bees were like possets to me, and every now and again I would give a jump and find I had been dozing. The last time I woke, I seemed to come back from farther away, and thought the sun had taken a great start in the heavens. I looked at the sprig of heath, and at that I could have cried aloud, for I saw I had betrayed my trust. My head was nearly turned with fear and shame, and at what I saw, when I looked out around me on the moor, my heart was like dying in my body. For sure enough, a body of horse soldiers had come down during my sleep, and were drawing near to us from the southeast, spread out in the shape of a fan, and riding their horses to and fro in the deep parts of the heather. When I waked Alan, he glanced first at the soldiers, then at the mark and the position of the sun, and knitted his brows with sudden, quick look, both ugly and anxious, which was all the reproach I had at him. What are we to do now? I asked. We'll have to play at being hares, said he. Do you see on mountain? Pointing to one on the northeastern sky. Aye, said I. Well then, says he, let us strike for that. Its name is Ben Alder. It is a wild desert mountain full of hills and hollows, and if we can win to it before the morn, we may do yet. But, Alan, cried I, that will take us across the very coming of the soldiers. I ken that fine, said he, but if we are driven back on Appin, we are 2 dead men. So now, David, man, be brisk. With that he began to run forward on his hands and knees with an incredible quickness, as though it were his natural way of going. All the time, too, he kept winding in and out in the lower parts of the moorland where we were the best concealed. Some of these had been burned or at least scathed with fire, and there rose in our faces, which were close to ground, a blinding, choking dust as fine as smoke. The water was long out, and this posture of running on hands and knees brings an overmastering weakness and weariness, so that the joints ache and the wrists faint under your weight. Now and then, indeed, what was a big bush of heather, we lay a while and panted, and putting aside the leaves, looked back at the dragoons. They had not spied us, for they held straight on, a half-troop, I think, covering about 2 miles of ground, and beating it mighty thoroughly as they went. I had awakened just in time, a little later, and we must have fled in front of them, instead of escaping on one side. Even as it was, the least misfortune might betray us, and now and again, when a grouse rose out of heather with a clap of wings, we lay as still as the dead and were afraid to breathe. The aching and faintness of my body, the laboring of my heart, the soreness of my hands, and the smarting of my throat and eyes and the continual smoke of dust and ashes had soon grown to be so unbearable that I would gladly have given up. Nothing but the fear of Alan lent me enough of a false kind of courage to continue. As for himself, and you are to bear in mind that he was cumbered with greatcoat, he had first turned crimson, but as time went on the redness began to be mingled with patches of white. His breath cried and whistled as it came, and his voice, when he whispered his observations in my ear during our halts, sounded like nothing human. Yet he seemed in no way dashed in spirits, nor did he at all abate in his activity, so that I was driven to marvel at the man's endurance. At length, in the first gloaming of the night, we heard a trumpet sound, and looking back from among the heather, saw the troop beginning to collect. A little after, they had built a fire and camped for the night about the middle of the waste. At this I begged and besought that we might lie down and sleep. "There shall be no sleep tonight," said Alan. "From now on, these weary dragoons of yours will keep the crown of the muirland, and none will get out of Appin but winged fowls. We got through in the nick of time, and shall we jeopard what we've gained? Nah. When the day comes, it shall find you and me in a fast place on Ben Alder." "Alan," I said, "it's not the want of will, it's the strength that I want. If I could, I would, but as sure as I'm alive, I cannot." "Very well, then," said Alan, "I'll carry ye." I looked to see if he were jesting, but no, the little man was in dead earnest, and the sight of so much resolution shamed me. "Lead away," said I, "I'll follow." He gave me one look as much as to say, "Well done, David," and off he set again at his top speed. It grew cooler and even a little darker, but not much, with the coming of the night. The sky was cloudless. It was still early in July and pretty far north. In the darkest part of that night, you would have needed pretty good eyes to read, but for all that, I have often seen it darker in a winter midday. Heavy dew fell and drenched the moor like rain, and this refreshed me for a while. When we stopped to breathe, and I had time to see all about me, the clearness and sweetness of night, the shapes of the hills like things asleep, and the fire dwindling away behind us, like a bright spot in the midst of the moor, anger would come upon me in a clap that I must still drag myself in agony and eat the dust like a worm. By what I have read in books, I think few that have held a pen were ever really wearied, or they would write of it more strongly. I had no care in my life, neither past nor future, and I scarce remember there was such a lad as David Balfour. I did not think of myself, but just of each fresh step which I was sure would be my last, with despair, and of Alan, who was the cause of it, with hatred. Alan was in the right trade as a soldier. This is the officer's part to make men continue to do things they know not wherefore, and when the choice was offered, they would lie down where they were and be killed. And I dare say I would have made a good enough private, for in these last hours it never occurred to me that I had any choice but just to obey as long as I was able and die obeying. Day began to come in after years, I thought, and by that time we were past the greatest danger and could walk upon our feet like men, instead of crawling like brutes. But, dear heart, have mercy. What a pair we must have made, going double like old grandfathers, stumbling like babes, and as white as dead folk. Never a word passed between us. Each set his mouth and kept his eyes in front of him, and lifted up his foot and set it down again, like people lifting weights at a country play wink with a frown 27, all the while with the moorfowl crying peep in the heather, and the light coming slowly clearer in the east. 27 village fair. I say Alan did as I did. Not that ever I looked at him, for I had enough ado to keep my feet. But because it is plain he must have been as stupid with weariness as myself, and looked as little where we were going, or we should not have walked into an ambush like blind men. It fell in this way. We were going down a heathery brae, Alan leading and I following a pace or two behind, like a fiddler and his wife, when upon a sudden the heather gave a rustle, 3 or 4 ragged men leaped out, and the next moment we were lying on our backs, each with a dirk at his throat. I don't think I cared. The pain of this rough handling was quite swallowed up by the pains of which I was already full, and I was too glad to have stopped walking to mind about a dirk. I lay looking up in the face of the man that held me, and I mind his face was black with the sun, and his eyes very light, but I was not afraid of him. I heard Alan and another whispering the Gaelic, and what they said was all one to me. Then the dirks were put up, our weapons were taken away, and we were set face to face, sitting in the heather. "They are Clooney's men," said Alan. "We couldn't have fallen better. We're just abide here with these, which are as out sentries, till they can get word to the chief of my arrival." Now Clooney Macpherson, the chief of the clan Vurich, had been one of the leaders of the great rebellion 6 years before. There was a price on his life, and I had supposed him long ago in France, with the rest of the heads of that desperate party. Even tired as I was, the surprise of what I heard half wakened me. "What?" I cried. "Is Clooney still here?" "Aye, is he so?" said Alan. "Still in his own country, and kept by his own clan. King George can do no more." I think I would have asked farther, but Alan gave me the put-off. "I am rather wearied," he said, "and I would like fine to get asleep." And without more words, he rolled on his face in a deep heather bush, and seemed to sleep at once. There was no such thing possible for me. You have heard grasshoppers whirring in the grass in the summer-time? Well, I had no sooner closed my eyes than my body, and above all my head, belly, and wrists, seemed to be filled with whirring grasshoppers, and I must open my eyes again at once, and tumble and toss, and sit up and lie down, and look at the sky which dazzled me, or at Clooney's wild and dirty sentries, peering out over the top of Bray and chattering to each other in the Gaelic. That was all the rest I had, until the messenger returned, when, as it appeared that Clooney would be glad to receive us, we must get once more upon our feet and set forward. Alan was in excellent good spirits, much refreshed by his sleep, very hungry, and looking pleasantly forward to a dram and a dish of hot collops, of which, it seems, the messenger had brought him word. For my part, it made me sick to hear of eating. I had been dead heavy before, and now I felt a kind of dreadful lightness, which would not suffer me to walk. I drifted like a gossamer. The ground seemed to me a cloud, the hills a featherweight, the air to have a current, like a running burn, which carried me to and fro. With all that, a sort of horror of despair sat on my mind, so that I could have wept at my own helplessness. I saw Alan knitting his brows at me, and supposed it was in anger, and that gave me a pang of light-headed fear, like what a child may have. I remember, too, that I was smiling, and could not stop smiling, hard as I tried, for I thought it was out of place at such a time. But my good companion had nothing in his mind but kindness, and the next moment 2 of the gillies had me by the arms, and I began to be carried forward with great swiftness, or so it appeared to me, although I dare say it was slowly enough in truth, through a labyrinth of dreary glens and hollows, and into the heart of that dismal mountain of Ben Alder. Chapter 23. Clooney's Cage. We came at last to the foot of an exceeding steep wood, which scrambled up a craggy hillside, and was crowned by a naked precipice. "It's here," said one of the guides, and we struck uphill. The trees clung upon the slope, like sailors on the shrouds of a ship, and their trunks were like the rounds of a ladder by which we mounted. Quite at the top, and just before the rocky face of the cliff sprang above the foliage, we found that strange house which was known in the country as Clooney's Cage. The trunks of several trees had been wattled across, the intervals strengthened with stakes, and the ground behind this barricade leveled up with earth to make the floor. A tree, which grew out from the hillside, was the living center beam of the roof. The walls were of wattle and covered with moss. The whole house had something of an egg shape, and it half hung, half stood in that steep hillside thicket, like a wasp's nest in a green hawthorn. Within, it was large enough to shelter 5 or 6 persons with some comfort. A projection of the cliff had been cunningly employed to be the fireplace, and the smoke rising against the face of the rock, and being not dissimilar in color, readily escaped notice from below. This was but one of Clooney's hiding places. He had caves, besides, and underground chambers in several parts of his country, and following the reports of the scouts, he moved from one to another as the soldiers drew near or moved away. By this manner of living, and thanks to the affection of his clan, he had not only stayed all this time in safety, while so many others had fled or been taken and slain, but stayed 4 or 5 years longer, and only went to France at last by the express command of his master. There he soon died, and it is strange to reflect that he may have regretted his cage upon Ben Alder. When we came to the door, he was seated by his rock chimney, watching a gillie about some cookery. He was mighty plainly habited, with a knitted nightcap drawn over his ears, and smoked a foul cutty pipe, for all that he had the manners of a king, and it was quite a sight to see him rise out of his place to welcome us. "Well, Mr. Stewart, come out, sir," said he, "and bring in your friend that as yet I dinna ken the name of." "And how is yourself, Clooney?" said Allen. "I hope ye do brawly, sir, and I am proud to see ye, and a present to ye, my friend the Laird of Shaw's, Mr. David Balfour." Allen never referred to my estate without a touch of a sneer, when we were alone, but with strangers he rang the words out like a herald. "Stepping by, the both of ye, gentlemen," says Clooney, "I make ye welcome to my house, which is a queer, rude place for certain, but one where I have entertained a royal personage, Mr. Stewart. Ye doubtless ken the personage I have in my eye. We'll take a dram for luck, and as soon as this handless man of mine has the collops ready, we'll dine and take a hand at the card taste as gentlemen should. My life is a bit dreeg," says he, pouring out the brandy. "I see little company, and sit and twirl my thumbs, and mine upon a great day that is gone by, and weary for another great day that we all hope will be upon the road. And so, here's a toast to ye, the Restoration. Here's a toast to ye, the Restoration." Thereupon we all touched glasses and drank. I am sure I wish no ill to King George, and if he had been there himself in proper person, it's like he would have done as I did. No sooner had I taken out the drain than I felt hugely better, and could look on and listen, still a little mistily perhaps, but no longer with the same groundless horror and distress of mind. It was certainly a strange place, and we had a strange host. In his long hiding, Clooney had grown to have all manner of precise habits, like those of an old maid. He had a particular place, where no one else must sit. The cage was arranged in a particular way, which none must disturb. Cookery was one of his chief fancies, and even while he was greeting us in, he kept an eye to the collops. It appears he sometimes visited or received visits from his wife and 1 or 2 of his nearest friends under the cover of night, but for the more part lived quite alone, and communicated only with his sentinels and the gillies that waited on him in the cage. The first thing in the morning, one of them, who was a barber, came and shaved him, and gave him the news of the country, of which he was immoderately greedy. There was no end to his questions. He put them as earnestly as a child, and at some of the answers laughed out of all bounds of reason, and would break out again laughing at the mere memory, hours after Barber was gone. To be sure, there might have been a purpose in his questions, for though he was thus sequestered, and like the other landed gentlemen of Scotland, stripped by the late Act of Parliament of legal powers, he still exercised a patriarchal justice in his clan. Disputes were brought to him in his hiding-hole to be decided, and the men of his country, who would have snapped their fingers at the court session, laid aside revenge and paid down money at the bare word of this forfeited and hunted outlaw. When he was angered, which was often enough, he gave his commands and breathed threats of punishment like any king, and his gillies trembled and crouched away from him like children before a hasty father. With each of them, as he entered, he ceremoniously shook hands, both parties touching their bonnets at the same time in a military manner. Altogether, I had a fair chance to see some of the inner workings of a Highland clan, and this with prescribed fugitive chief, his country conquered, the troops riding upon all sides in quest of him, sometimes within a mile of where he lay, and when the least of the ragged fellows whom he raided and threatened could have made a fortune by betraying him. On that first day, as soon as the collops were ready, Clooney gave them with his own hand a squeeze of a lemon, for he was well supplied with luxuries, and bade us draw in to our meal. "They," said he, meaning the collops, "are such as I gave his Royal Highness in this very house," bating the lemon juice, for at that time we were glad to get the meat and never fashed for kitchen. 28 indeed, there were mere dragoons and lemons in my country in the year 46. 28. Condiment. I do not know if the collops were truly very good, but my heart rose against the sight of them, and I could eat but little. All the while Clooney entertained us with stories of Prince Charlie's stay in the cage, giving us the very words of speakers, and rising from his place to show us where they stood. By these, I gathered the prince was a gracious, spirited boy, like the son of a race of polite kings, but not so wise as Solomon. I gathered, too, that while he was in the cage, he was often drunk. So the fault that has since, by all accounts, made such a wreck of him, had even then begun to show itself. We were no sooner done eating than Clooney brought out an old, thumbed, greasy pack of cards, such as you may find in a mean inn, and his eyes brightened in his face as he proposed that we should fall to playing. Now, this was one of the things I had been brought up to eschew like disgrace, it being held by my father neither the part of a Christian nor yet of a gentleman to set his own livelihood and fish for that of others, on the cast of painted pasteboard. To be sure, I might have pleaded my fatigue, which was excuse enough, but I thought it behoved that I should bear a testimony. I must have got very red in the face, but I spoke steadily, and told them I had no call to be a judge of others, but for my own part, it was a matter in which I had no clearness. Clooney stopped mingling the cards. "What in Deal's name is this?" says he. "What kind of Whiggish, canting talk is this for the house of Clooney Macpherson?" "I will put my hand in the fire for Mr. Balfour," says Allen. "He is an honest and a mettled gentleman, and I would have ye bear in mind who says it. I bear a king's name," says he, cocking his hat, "and I and any that I call friend are company for the best. But the gentleman is tired and should sleep. If he has no mind of the card taste, it will never hinder you and me. And I'm fit and willing, sir, to play ye any game that ye can name." "Sir," says Clooney, "in this poor house of mine I would have you to ken that any gentleman may follow his pleasure. If your friend would like to stand on his head, he is welcome. And if either he or you or any other man is not precisely satisfied, I will be proud to step outside with him. I had no will that these two friends should cut their throats for my sake. Sir," said I am very wearied, as Allen says, and what's more, as you are a man that likely is sons of your own, I may tell you it was a promise to my father." Say nay mair," said Clooney, and pointed me to a bed of heather in a corner of the cage. For all that he was displeased enough, looked at me askance, and grumbled when he looked. And indeed it must be owned that both my scruples and the words in which I declared them smacked some of the Covenanter, and were little in their place among wild Highland Jacobites. What with the brandy and the venison, a strange heaviness had come over me, and I had scarce lain down upon the bed before I fell into a kind of trance, in which I continued almost the whole time of our stay in the cage. Sometimes I was broad awake and understood what passed. Sometimes I only heard voices or men snoring, like the voice of a silly river, and the plaids upon the wall dwindled down and swelled out again, like firelight shadows on the roof. I must sometimes have spoken or cried out, for I remember I was now in an amaze of being answered, yet I was conscious of no particular nightmare, only of general black, abiding horror, a horror of the place I was in, and the bed I lay in, and the plaids on the wall, and the voices, and the fire, and myself. The barber Gilly, who was a doctor too, was called and prescribed for me, but as he spoke in the Gaelic, I understood not a word of his opinion, and was too sick even to ask for a translation. I knew well enough I was ill, and that was all I cared about. I paid little heed while I lay in this poor pass. But Allen and Clooney were most of the time at the cards, and I am clear that Allen must have begun by winning, for I remember sitting up and seeing them hard at it, and a great glittering pile of as much as 60 or 100 guineas on the table. It looked strange enough to see all this wealth in a nest upon a cliffside, wattled about growing trees. And even then, I thought it seemed deep water for Allen to be riding, who had no better battle horse than a green purse and a matter of 5 pounds. The luck, it seems, changed on the second day. About noon I was wakened as usual for dinner, and as usual refused to eat, and was given a dram with some bitter infusion which the barber had prescribed. The sun was shining in at the open door of the cage, and this dazzled and offended me. Clooney sat at the table, biting the pack of cards. Allen had stooped over the bed, and had his face close to my eyes, to which, troubled as they were with the fever, it seemed of the most shocking bigness. He asked me for a loan of my money. What for? Said I. Oh, just for a loan, said he. But why? I repeated. I don't see. Hut, David, said Alan. You wouldn't grudge me a loan? I would, though, if I had had my senses. But all I thought of then was to get his face away, and I handed him my money. On the morning of the third day, when we had been 48 hours in the cage, I awoke with a great relief of spirits, very weak and weary indeed, but seeing things of the right size and with their honest, everyday appearance. I had a mind to eat, moreover, rose from bed of my own movement, and as soon as we had breakfasted, stepped to the entry of the cage and sat down outside in the top of the wood. It was a gray day with a cool, mild air, and I sat in a dream all morning, only disturbed by the passing by of Cluny's scouts and servants coming with provisions and reports, for as the coast was at that time clear, you might almost say he held court openly. When I returned, he and Alan had laid the cards aside and were questioning a gillie, and the chief turned about and spoke to me in the Gaelic. I have no Gaelic, sir, said I. Now, since the card question, everything I said or did had the power of annoying Cluny. Your name has more sense than yourself, then, said he angrily, for it's good Gaelic. But the point is this. My scout reports all clear in the south, and the question is, have ye the strength to go? I saw cards on the table, but no gold. Only a heap of little written papers, and these all on Cluny's side. Alan, besides, had an odd look, like a man not very well content, and I began to have a strong misgiving. I do not know if I am as well as I should be, said I, looking at Alan, but the little money we have has a long way to carry us. Alan took his underlip into his mouth and looked upon the ground. David, says he at last, I've lost it. There's a naked truth. My money too, said I. Your money too, says Alan with a groan. Ye shouldn't have given it me. I'm daft when I get to the cartes. Hoot toot, said Cluny. It was all daffing. It's all nonsense. Of course you'll have your money back again, and the double of it, if ye'll make so free with me. It would be a singular thing for me to keep it. It's not to be supposed that I would be any hindrance to gentlemen in your situation. That would be a singular thing, cries he, and began to pull gold out of his pocket with a mighty red face. Alan said nothing, only looked on the ground. Will you step to the door with me, sir? Said I. Cluny said he would be very glad, and followed me readily enough. But he looked flustered and put out. And now, sir, says I must first acknowledge your generosity. Nonsensical nonsense, cries Cluny. Where's the generosity? This is just a most unfortunate affair. But what would ye have me do, boxed up in this beast-skep of a cage of mine, but just set my friends at a cartes when I can get them? And if they lose, of course, is not be supposed. And here he came to a pause. Yes, said I, if they lose, you give them back their money. And if they win, they carry away yours in their pouches. I have said before that I grant your generosity. But to me, sir, it's a very painful thing to be placed in this position. There was a little silence, in which Cluny seemed always as if he was about to speak, but said nothing. All the time, he grew redder and redder in the face. I am a young man, said I, and I ask your advice. Advise me as you would your son. My friend fairly lost his money, after having fairly gained a far greater sum of yours. Can I accept it back again? Would that be the right part for me to play? Whatever I do, you can see for yourself it must be hard upon a man of any pride. It's rather hard on me, too, Mr. Balfour, said Cluny, and ye give me very much the look of a man that has entrapped poor people to their hurt. I wouldn't have my friends come to any house of mine to accept affronts. No, he cried, with a sudden heat of anger, nor yet to give them. And so you see, sir, said I, there is something to be said upon my side, and this gambling is a very poor employ for gentlefolks. But I am still waiting your opinion. I am sure if ever Cluny hated any man, it was David Balfour. He looked me all over with a warlike eye, and I saw the challenge at his lips. But either my youth disarmed him, or perhaps his own sense of justice. Certainly it was a mortifying matter for all concerned, and not least Cluny, the more credit that he took it as he did. Mr. Balfour, said he, I think you are too nice and covenanting, but for all that you have the spirit of a very pretty gentleman. Upon my honest word, ye may take this money. It's what I would tell my son, and here's my hand along with it. Chapter 24. The Flight in the Heather. The Quarrel. Alan and I were put across Loch Rock under cloud of night, and went down its eastern shore to another hiding place near the head of Loch Rannoch, whither we were led by one of the gillies from the cage. This fellow carried all our luggage and Alan's greatcoat in the bargain, trotting along under the burthen, far less than the half of which used to weigh me to the ground, like a stout hill pony with a feather. Yet he was a man that, in plain contest, I could have broken on my knee. Doubtless it was a great relief to walk disencumbered, and perhaps without that relief and the consequent sense of liberty and lightness, I could not have walked at all. I was but new risen from a bed of sickness, and there was nothing in the state of our affairs to heart me for much exertion. Traveling, as we did, over the most dismal deserts in Scotland, under a cloudy heaven, and with divided hearts among the travelers. For long we said nothing, marching alongside or one behind the other, each with a set countenance. I, angry and proud, and drawing what strength I had from these two violent and sinful feelings. Alan angry and ashamed that he had lost my money, angry that I should take it so ill. The thought of a separation ran always the stronger in my mind, and the more I approved of it, the more ashamed I grew of my approval. It would be a fine, handsome, generous thing, indeed, for Alan to turn round and say to me, "Go, I am in the most danger, and my company only increases yours." But for me to turn to a friend who certainly loved me and say to him, "You are in great danger. I am in but little. Your friendship is a burden. Go. Take your risks and bear your hardships alone." No, that was impossible, and even to think of it privily to myself made my cheeks to burn. And yet Alan had behaved like a child, and what is worse, a treacherous child, wheedling my money from me while I lay half-conscious was scarce better than theft. And yet here he was trudging by my side, without a penny to his name, and by what I could see, quite blithe to sponge upon the money he had driven me to beg. True, I was ready to share it with him, but it made me rage to see him count upon my readiness. These were the two things uppermost in my mind, and I could open my mouth upon neither without black ungenerosity. So I did the next worst, and said nothing, nor so much as looked once at my companion, save with the tail of my eye. At last, upon the other side of Loch Rock, going over a smooth, rushy place, where the walking was easy, he could bear no longer, and came close to me. "David," says he, "this is no way for two friends to take a small accident. I have to say that I'm sorry, and so that said, and now if you have anything, ye'd better say it." "Oh," says I have nothing." He seemed disconcerted, at which I was meanly pleased. "No," said he, with rather a trembling voice, "but when I say I was to blame, why, of course, ye were to blame," said I coolly, "and you will bear me out that I have never reproached you." "Never," says he, "but ye ken very well that ye be done worse. Are we to part? Ye said so once before. Are ye to say it again? There's hills and heather enough between here and the two seas, David, and I will own I'm no very keen to stay where I'm no wanted." This pierced me like a sword, and seemed to lay bare my private disloyalty. "Alan Breck," I cried, and then, "do you think I am one to turn my back on you in your chief need? You durstn't say it to my face. My whole conduct's there to give the lie to it. It's true, I fell asleep upon the muir, but that was from weariness, and you do wrong to cast up to me, which is what I never did," said Alan. "But aside from that," I continued, "what have I done that you should even me to dogs by such a supposition? I never yet failed a friend, and it's not likely I'll begin with you. There are things between us that I can never forget, even if you can." "I will only say this to ye, David," said Alan very quietly, "that I have long been owing ye my life, and now I owe ye money. Ye should try to make that burden light for me." This ought to have touched me, and in a manner it did, but the wrong manner. I felt I was behaving badly, and was now not only angry with Alan, but angry with myself in the bargain, and it made me the more cruel. "You asked me to speak," said I. "Well, then, I will. You own yourself that you have done me a disservice. I have had to swallow an affront. I have never reproached you. I never named a thing till you did. And now you blame me," cried I, "because I canny laugh and sing as if I was glad to be affronted. The next thing will be that I'm to go down upon my knees and thank you for it. Ye should think more of others, Alan Breck. If ye thought more of others, you would perhaps speak less about yourself, And when a friend that likes you very well has passed over an offense without a word, you would be blithe to let it lie, instead of making it a stick to break his back with. By your own way of it, it was you that was to blame. Then it shouldn't be you to seek the quarrel. A wheel, said Alan, say nay mair. And we fell back into our former silence, and came to our journey's end, and supped, and lay down to sleep without another word. The gillie put us across Loch Rannoch in the dusk the next day, and gave us his opinion as to our best route. This was to get us up at once into the tops of the mountains, to go round by a circuit, turn the heads of Glen Lyon, Glen Lochy, and Glen Dochart, and come down upon the lowlands by Kippen and the upper waters of the Forth. Alan was little pleased with a route which led us to the country of his blood foes, the Glenorchy Campbells. He objected that by turning to the east, we should come almost at once among the Athole Stewarts, a race of his own name and lineage, although following a different chief, and come besides by a far easier and swifter way to the place whither we were bound. But the gillie, who was indeed the chief man of Cluny's scouts, had good reasons to give him on all hands, naming the force of troops in every district, and alleging finally, as well as I could understand, that we should nowhere be so little troubled as in the country of the Campbells. Alan gave way at last, but with only half a heart. It's one of the dowiest countries in Scotland, said he. There's naething there that I ken but heath and crows and Campbells. But I see that ye're a man of some penetration, and be it as ye please. We set forth accordingly by this itinerary, and for the best part of 3 nights travelled on eerie mountains and among the well-heads of wild rivers, often buried in mist, almost continually blown and rained upon, and not once cheered by any glimpse of sunshine. By day, we lay and slept in the drenching heather. By night, incessantly clambered upon breakneck hills and among rude crags. We often wandered. We were often so involved in fog that we must lie quiet till it lightened. A fire was never to be thought of. Our only food was drammock and a portion of cold meat that we had carried from a cage, and as for drink, heaven knows we had no want of water. This was a dreadful time, rendered the more dreadful by the gloom of the weather and the country. I was never warm. My teeth chattered in my head. I was troubled with very sore throat, such as I had on the isle. I had a painful stitch in my side, which never left me, and when I slept in my wet bed, with the rain beating above and the mud oozing below me, it was to live over again and fancy the worst part of my adventures, to see the Tower of Shaws lit by lightning, ransom carried below on the men's backs, Schwan dying on the roundhouse floor, or Colin Campbell grasping at the bosom of his coat. From such broken slumbers I would be aroused in the gloaming, to sit up in the same puddle where I had slept, and sup cold drammock, the rain driving sharp in my face or running down my back in icy trickles, the mist enfolding us like as in a gloomy chamber, or perhaps, if the wind blew, falling suddenly apart and showing us the gulf of some dark valley where the streams were crying aloud. The sound of an infinite number of rivers came up from all round. In this steady rain the springs of the mountain were broken up. Every glen gushed water like cistern. Every stream was in high spate, and it filled and overflowed its channel. During our night tramps, it was solemn to hear the voice of them below in the valleys, now booming like thunder, now with an angry cry. I could well understand the story of the water kelpie, that demon of the streams, who is fabled to keep wailing and roaring at the ford until the coming of the doomed traveler. Alan, I saw, believed it or half believed it, and when the cry of the river rose more than usually sharp, I was a little surprised, though, of course, I would still be shocked, to see him cross himself in the manner of the Catholics. During all these horrid wanderings we had no familiarity, scarcely even that of speech. The truth is that I was sickening for my grave, which is my best excuse. But besides that I was of an unforgiving disposition from my birth, slow to take offense, slower to forget it, and now incensed both against my companion and myself. For the best part of 2 days he was unweariedly kind, silent, indeed, but always ready to help, and always hoping, as I could very well see, that my displeasure would blow by. For the same length of time I stayed in myself, nursing my anger, roughly refusing his services, and passing him over with my eyes as if he had been a bush or a stone. The second night, or rather the peep of the third day, found us upon a very open hill, so that we could not follow our usual plan and lie down immediately to eat and sleep. Before we had reached a place of shelter, the gray had come pretty clear, for though it still rained, the clouds ran higher, and Alan, looking in my face, showed some marks of concern. "Ye had better let me take your pack," said he, for perhaps the 9th time since we had parted from the scout beside Loch Rannoch. "I do very well, I thank you," said I, as cold as ice. Alan flushed darkly. "I'll not offer again," he said. "I'm not a patient man, David." "I never said you were," said I, which was exactly the rude, silly speech of a boy of 10. Alan made no answer at the time, but his conduct answered for him. Henceforth, it is to be thought, he quite forgave himself for the affair at Clooney's, cocked his hat again, walked jauntily, whistled airs, and looked at me upon one side with a provoking smile. The 3rd night we were to pass through the western end of the country of Balquhidder. It came clear and cold, with a touch in the air like frost, and a northerly wind that blew the clouds away and made the stars bright. The streams were full, of course, and still made a great noise among the hills, but I observed that Alan thought no more upon the Kelpie, and was in high good spirits. As for me, the change of weather came too late. I had lain in the mire so long that, as the Bible has it, my very clothes abhorred me. I was dead weary, deadly sick and full of pains and shiverings. The chill of the wind went through me, and the sound of it confused my ears. In this poor state, I had to bear from my companion something in the nature of a persecution. He spoke a good deal, and never without a taunt. "Wig" was the best name he had to give me. "Here," he would say, "here's a dub for ye to jump, my wiggy. I ken you're a fine jumper." And so on, all the time with jibing voice and face. I knew it was my own doing, and no one else's, but I was too miserable to repent. I felt I could drag myself but little farther. Pretty soon I must lie down and die on these wet mountains like a sheep or a fox, and my bones must whiten there like the bones of a beast. My head was light, perhaps, but I began to love the prospect. I began to glory in the thought of such a death, alone in the desert, with the wild eagles besieging my last moments. Alan would repent then, I thought. He would remember, when I was dead, how much he owed me, and the remembrance would be torture. So I went like a sick, silly, and bad-hearted schoolboy, feeding my anger against a fellow man, when I would have been better on my knees, crying on God for mercy. And at each of Alan's taunts, I hugged myself. Thinks I to myself, I have a better taunt in readiness. When I lie down and die, you'll feel like a buffet in your face. Ah, what a revenge! Ah, how you will regret your ingratitude and cruelty. All the while, I was growing worse and worse. Once I had fallen, my legs simply doubling under me, and this had struck Alan for the moment, but I was afoot so briskly, and set off again with such a natural manner, that he soon forgot the incident. Flushes of heat went over me, and then spasms of shuddering. The stitch in my side was hardly bearable. At last I began to feel that I could trail myself no farther. And with that, there came on me all at once the wish to have it out with Alan, let my anger blaze, and be done with my life in a more sudden manner. He had just called me Whig. I stopped. "Mr. Stewart," said I, in a voice that quivered like a fiddle string, "you are older than I am, and should know your manners. Do you think it either very wise or very witty to cast my politics in my teeth?" I thought, where folk differed, it was the part of gentlemen to differ civilly, and if I did not, I may tell you I could find a better taunt than some of yours. Alan had stopped opposite to me, his hat cocked, his hands in his breeches pockets, his head a little on one side. He listened, smiling evilly as I could see by the starlight, and when I had done he began to whistle a Jacobite air. It was the air made in mockery of General Cope's defeat at Preston Pans. "Hey, Johnny Cope, are you walking yet? And are your drums a beat yet?" And it came in my mind that Alan, on the day of that battle, had been engaged upon the royal side. "Why do you take that air, Mr. Stewart?" said I. "Is that to remind me you have been beaten on both sides?" The air stopped on Alan's lips. "David," said he. "But it's time these manners ceased," I continued, "and I mean you shall henceforth speak civilly of my king and my good friends the Campbells." "I am a Stewart," began Alan. "Oh," says I ken ye bear a king's name, but you are to remember, since I have been in the Highlands, I have seen a good many of those that bear it, and the best I can say of them is this, that they would be none the worse of washing." "Do you know that you insult me?" said Alan very low. "I am sorry for that," said I, For I am not done, and if you to stace a sermon, I doubt the pearly 29 will please you as little. You have been chased in the field by the grown men of my party. It seems a poor kind of pleasure to outface a boy. Both the Campbells and the Whigs have beaten you. You have run before them like a hare. It behoves you to speak of them as of your betters. 29. A second sermon. Alan stood quite still, the tails of his greatcoat clapping behind him in the wind. This is a pity, he said at last. There are things said that cannot be passed over. I never asked you to, said I. I am as ready as yourself. Ready, said he. Ready. I repeated, I am no blower and boaster like some that I could name. Come on. And drawing my sword, I fell on guard as Alan himself had taught me. David, he cried, are ye daft? I can't draw upon ye, David. It's fair murder. That was your lookout when you insulted me, said I. It's the truth, cried Alan, and he stood for a moment, wringing his mouth in his hand like a man in sore perplexity. It's the bare truth, he said, and drew his sword. But before I could touch his blade with mine, he had thrown it from him and fallen to the ground. Nah, he kept saying, nah, I canny. At this, alas, my anger oozed all out of me, and I found myself only sick and sorry and blank and wondering at myself. I would have given a world to take back what I had said, but a word once spoken, who can recapture it? I minded me of all Alan's kindness and courage in the past, how he had helped and cheered and borne with me in our evil days, and then recalled my own insults and saw that I had lost forever that doughty friend. At the same time, the sickness that hung upon me seemed to redouble, and the pang in my side was like a sword for sharpness. I thought I must have swooned where I stood. This it was that gave me a thought. No apology could blot out what I had said. It was needless to think of one. None could cover the offense. But where an apology was vain, a mere cry for help might bring Alan back to my side. I put my pride away from me. Alan, I said, if he can't help me, I must just die here. He started up sitting and looked at me. It's true, said I, I'm by with it. Oh, let me get into the build of a house. I can die there easier. I had no need to pretend. Whether I chose or not, I spoke in a weeping voice that would have melted a heart of stone. Can you walk? Asked Alan. No, said I, not without help. This last hour my legs have been fainting under me. I have a stitch in my side like a red-hot iron. I can't even breathe right. If I die, you can forgive me, Alan? In my heart, I liked ye fine, even when I was the angriest. Wheesht, cried Alan. Dinna say that. David, man, ye can— He shut his mouth upon a sob. Let me get my arm about ye, he continued. That's the way. Now lean upon me hard. Good kens where there's a house. We're in Balwitter. 2. There should be no one houses, no, nor friends' houses here. Do ye gang easier so, Davy? Do ye gang easier so, Davy? I, said I can be doing this way, and I pressed his arm with my hand. Again he came near sobbing. Davy, said he, I'm no a right man at all. I have neither sense nor kindness. I can ne'er remember ye were just a bairn. I couldn't see ye would die on your feet. Davy, ye'll have to try and forgive me. Oh, man, let's say no more about it, said I. We're neither one of us to mend the other. That's the truth. We must just bear and forbear, man Alan. Oh, but my stitch is sore. Is there nae house? I'll find a house to ye, David, he said, stoutly. We'll follow down the burn, where there's bound to be houses. My poor man, will ye no be better on my back? Oh, Alan, says I, and me a good 12 inches taller? Ye're no such a thing, cried Alan with a start. There may be a trifling matter of an inch or two. I'm no saying I'm just exactly what you would call a tall man, whatever, and I dare say, he added, his voice tailing off in a laughable manner. Now, when I come to think of it, I dare say you'll be just about right. Aye, it'll be a foot or near hand, or maybe even mair. It was sweet and laughable to hear Alan eat his words up in a fear of some fresh quarrel. I could have laughed, had not my stitch caught me so hard. But if I had laughed, I think I must have wept too. Alan, cried I, what makes ye so good to me? What makes ye care for such a thankless fellow? Deed, and I don't know, said Alan. For just precisely what I thought I liked about ye was that ye never quarreled. and now I like ye better. Chapter 25. In Balk Widder. At the door of the first house we came to, Alan knocked, which was a no very safe enterprise in such a part of the Highlands as the braes of Balk Widder. No great clan held rule there. It was filled and disputed by small septs and broken remnants, and what they call chiefless folk, driven into the wild country about the springs of Forth and Teeth by the advance of the Campbells. Here were Stewarts and MacLarens, which came to the same thing, for the MacLarens followed Alan's chief in war, and made but one clan with Appin. Here, too, were many of that old, prescribed, nameless, red-handed clan of the MacGregors. They had always been ill-considered, and now worse than ever, having credit with no side or party in the whole country of Scotland. Their chief, MacGregor, was in exile. The more immediate leader of that part of them about Balk Widder, James Moore, Rob Roy's eldest son, lay waiting his trial in Edinburgh Castle. They were in ill blood with Highlander and Lowlander, with the Grahams, the MacLarens, and the Stewarts, and Alan, who took up the quarrel of any friend, however distant, was extremely wishful to avoid them. Chance served us very well, for it was a household of MacLarens that we found, where Alan was not only welcome for his name's sake, but known by reputation. Here then I was got to bed without delay, and a doctor fetched, who found me in a sorry plight. But whether because he was a very good doctor or I a very young, strong man, I lay bedridden for no more than a week, and before a month I was able to take the road again with good heart. All this time Alan would not leave me, though I often pressed him, and indeed his foolhardiness in staying was a common subject of outcry with the 2 or 3 friends that were let into the secret. He had by day in a hole of the braes under a little wood, and at night, when the coast was clear, would come into the house to visit me. I need not say if I was pleased to see him. Mrs. MacLaren, our hostess, thought nothing good enough for such a guest, and as Duncan Dechew, which was the name of our host, had a pair of pipes in his house, and was much of a lover of music, this time of my recovery was quite a festival, and we commonly turned night into day. The soldiers let us be, although once a party of 2 companies, and some dragoons went by in the bottom of the valley, where I could see them to the window as I lay in bed. What was much more astonishing, no magistrate came near me, and there was no question put whence I came or whither I was going, and in that time of excitement I was as free of all inquiry as though I had lain in a desert. Yet my presence was known before I left to all the people in Balk Widder and the adjacent parts, many coming about the house on visits and these, after the custom of the country, spreading the news among their neighbors. The bills, too, had now been printed. There was one pinned near the foot of my bed, where I could read my own not very flattering portrait and, in larger characters, the amount of the blood money that had been set upon my life. Duncan Dechew and the rest that knew that I had come there in Alan's company could have entertained no doubt of who I was, and many others must have had their guess. For though I had changed my clothes, I could not change my age or person, and Lowland boys of 18 were not so rife in these parts of the world, and above all about that time, that they could fail to put one thing with another and connect me with the bill. So it was at least other folk keep a secret among 2 or 3 near friends, and somehow it leaks out, but among these clansmen it is told to a whole countryside, and they will keep it for a century. There was but one thing happened worth narrating, and that is the visit I had of Robin Oig, one of the sons of the notorious Rob Roy. He was sought upon all sides on a charge of carrying a young woman from Balfour and marrying her, as was alleged, by force. Yet he stepped about Balk Widder like a gentleman in his own walled policy. It was he who had shot James MacLaren at the plough stilts, a quarrel never satisfied. Yet he walked into the house of his blood enemies as a rider 30 might into a public inn. 30, commercial traveler. Duncan had time to pass me word of who it was, and we looked at one another in concern. You should understand, it was then close upon the time of Alan's coming. The 2 were little likely to agree, and yet if we sent word or sought to make a signal, it was sure to arouse suspicion in a man under so dark a cloud as a MacGregor. He came in with a great show of civility, but like a man among inferiors, took off his bonnet to Mrs. MacLaren, but clapped it on his head again to speak to Duncan, and having thus set himself, as he would have thought, in a proper light, came to my bedside and bowed. "I am given to know, sir," says he, "that your name is Balfour." "They call me David Balfour," said I, "at your service." "I would give you my name in return, sir," he replied, but it's one somewhat blown upon of late days, and it'll perhaps suffice if I tell ye that I am own brother to James more Drummond or MacGregor, of whom ye will scarce have failed to hear. No, sir, said I, a little alarmed, nor yet of your father, MacGregor Campbell. And I sat up and bowed in bed, for I thought best to compliment him, in case he was proud of having had an outlaw to his father. He bowed in return. But what I am come to say, sir, he went on, is this. In the year 45, my brother raised a part of the Gregera and marched 6 companies to strike a stroke for the good side. And the surgeon that marched with our clan and cured my brother's leg when it was broken in the brush of Preston Pans was a gentleman of the same name precisely as yourself. He was brother to Balfour Baith, and if you are in any reasonable degree of nearness one of that gentleman's kin, I have come to put myself and my people at your command. You are to remember that I knew no more of my descent than any cadger's dog. My uncle, to be sure, had prated of some of our high connections, but nothing to present purpose, and there was nothing left me but that bitter disgrace of owning that I could not tell. Robin told me shortly he was sorry he had put himself about, turned his back upon me without a sign of salutation, and as he went toward the door, I could hear him telling Duncan that I was only some kinless loon that didn't know his own father. Angry as I was at these words, and ashamed of my own ignorance, I could scarce keep from smiling that a man who was under the lash of the law, and was indeed hanged some 3 years later, should be so nice as to the descent of his acquaintances. Just in the door, he met Allen coming in, and the two drew back and looked at each other like strange dogs. They were neither of them big men, but they seemed fairly to swell out with pride. Each wore a sword, and by a move in his haunch, thrust clear the hilt of it, so that it might be the more readily grasped and the blade drawn. Mr. Stewart, I am thinking, says Robin. Troth, Mr. MacGregor, it's not a name to be ashamed of, answered Allen. I did not know you were in my country, sir, says Robin. It sticks in my mind that I am in the country of my friends McLaren's, says Allen. That's a kittle point, returned the other. There may be 2 words to say to that, but I think I will have heard that you are a man of your sword. Unless you were born deaf, Mr. MacGregor, you will have heard a good deal more than that, says Allen. I am not the only man that can draw, steel, and happen, and when my kinsman and Captain Ardshiel had a talk with gentlemen of your name, not so many years back, I could never hear that the MacGregor had the best of it. Do you mean my father, sir? Says Robin. Well, I wouldn't wonder, said Allen. The gentleman I have in my mind had the ill taste to clap Campbell to his name. My father was an old man, returned Robin. The match was unequal. You and me would make a better pair, sir. I was thinking that, said Allen. I was half out of bed, and Duncan had been hanging at the elbow of these fighting cocks, ready to intervene upon the least occasion. But when that word was uttered, it was a case of now or never, and Duncan, with something of a white face to be sure, thrust himself between. Gentlemen, said he, I will have been thinking of a very different matter. Whatever, here are my pipes, and here are you 2 gentlemen who are baith acclaimed pipers. It's an all dispute which one of ye is the best. Here will be a broad chance to settle it. Why, sir, said Allen, still addressing Robin, from whom indeed he had not so much as shifted his eyes, nor yet Robin from him. Why, sir, says Allen, I think I will have heard some stuff 31 the sort. Have ye music, as folks say? Are ye a bit of a piper? 31, rumour. I can pipe like a mackerman, cries Robin. And that is a very bold word. Quoth Allen, I have made bolder words good before now, returned Robin, and that against better adversaries. It is easy to try that, says Allen. Duncan DHU made haste to bring out the pair of pipes that was his principal possession, and to set before his guests some mutton ham and a bottle of that drink which they call at-hole brose, and which is made of old whiskey, strained honey, and sweet cream, slowly beaten together in the right order and proportion. The 2 enemies were still on the very breach of quarrel, but down they sat, one upon each side of the peat fire, with a mighty show of politeness. MacLaren pressed him to taste his mutton ham and the wife's brose, reminding them the wife was out of at-hole and had a name far and wide for her skill in that confection. But Robin put aside these hospitalities as bad for the breath. I would have ye to remark, sir, said Allen, that I haven't eat broken bread for near upon 10 hours, which will be worse of breath than any brose in Scotland. I will take no advantages, Mr. Stewart, replied Robin. Eat and drink, I'll follow you. Each ate a small portion of the ham and drank a glass of the brose to Mrs. McLaren. And then, after a great number of civilities, Robin took the pipes and played a little spring in a very ranting manner. "Ye can blow," said Alan, and taking the instrument from his rival, he first played the same spring in a manner identical with Robin's, and then wandered into variations which, as he went on, he decorated with a perfect flight of grace notes, such as Piper's Love and Call the Warblers. I had been pleased with Robin's playing. Alan's ravished me. "That's no very bad, Mr. Stewart," said the rival, "but ye show a poor device in your warblers." "Me!" cried Alan, the blood starting to his face. "I give you the lie." "D'ye own yourself beaten at the pipes, then," said Robin, "that ye seek to change them for the sword?" "And that's very well said, Mr. McGregor," returned Alan. "And in the meantime," laying a strong accent on the word, "I take back the lie. I appeal to Duncan." "Indeed, ye need appeal to naebody," said Robin. "Ye're a far better judge than any McLaren in Balquhidder. For the God's truth that you're a very creditable piper for Stewart. Hand me the pipes." Alan did as he asked, and Robin proceeded to imitate and correct some part of Alan's variations, which it seemed that he remembered perfectly. "Ye have music," said Alan gloomily. "And now be the judge yourself, Mr. Stewart," said Robin, and taking up the variations from the beginning, he worked them throughout to so new a purpose, with such ingenuity and sentiment, and with so odd a fancy and so quick a knack in the grace notes, that I was amazed to hear him. As for Alan, his face grew dark and hot, and he sat and gnawed his fingers like a man under some deep affront. "Enough," he cried. "Ye can blow the pipes, make the most of that." And he made as if to rise. But Robin only held out his hand as if to ask for silence, and struck into the slow measure of a pibroch. It was a fine piece of music in itself, and nobly played. But it seems, besides, it was a piece peculiar to the Appin Stewarts and a chief favorite with Alan. The first notes were scarce out before there came a change in his face. When the time quickened, he seemed to grow restless in his seat, and long before that piece was at an end, the last signs of his anger died from him, and he had no thought but for the music. "Robin Oig," he said, "ye are a great piper." "Robin Oig," he said when it was done, "ye are a great piper. I am not fit to blow in the same kingdom with ye. Body of me, ye have mair music in your sporran than I have in my head. And though it still sticks in my mind that I could maybe show ye another of it with the cold steel, I warn ye beforehand, it'll no be fair. It would go against my heart to haggle a man that can blow the pipes as you can." Thereupon that quarrel was made up. All night long the brose was going, the pipes changing hands, and the day had come pretty bright, and the three men were none the better for what they had been taking, before Robin as much as thought upon the road. Chapter 26. End of the flight. We passed the 4th. The month, as I have said, was not yet out, but was already far through August, and beautiful warm weather, with every sign of an early and great harvest, when I was pronounced able for my journey. Our money was now run to so low an ebb that we must think first of all on speed. For we came not soon to Mr. Rankiller's, or if when we came there he should fail to help me, we must surely starve. In Alan's view, besides, the hunt must have now greatly slackened, and the line of the Forth and even Stirling Bridge, which is the main pass over that river, would be watched with little interest. "It's a chief principle in military affairs," said he, "to go where ye are least expected. Forth is our trouble. Ye ken the saying, Forth bridles the wild Highlandman. Well, if we seek to creep round about the head of that river and come down by Kippen or Balfour, it's just precisely there that they'll be looking to lay hands on us. But if we stave on straight to the all-brig of Stirling, I'll lay my sword they let us pass unchallenged." The first night, accordingly, we pushed to the house of McLaren in Strathire, a friend of Duncan's, where we slept the 21st of the month, and whence we set forth again about the fall of night to make another easy stage. The 22nd we lay in a heather bush on the hillside in Yumvar, within view of a herd of deer, the happiest 10 hours of sleep in a fine, breathing sunshine and on bone-dry ground that I have ever tasted. That night we struck Allen Water and followed it down, and coming to the edge of the hill saw the whole course of Stirling underfoot, as flat as a pancake, with the town and castle on a hill in the midst of it, and the moon shining on the links of Forth. "Now," said Alan, "I kenna if ye care, But ye're in your own land again. We passed the healing line in the first hour, and now if we could but pass yon crooked water, we might cast our bonnets in the air. In Allen Water, nearby where it falls into the Forth, we found a little sandy islet, overgrown with burdock, butterbur, and like low plants that would just cover us if we lay flat. Here it was we made our camp, within plain view of Stirling Castle, whence we could hear the drums beat as some part of the garrison paraded. Shearers worked all day in a field on one side of the river, and we could hear the stones going on the hooks and the voices, and even the words of the men talking. It behoved to lie close and keep silent. But the sand of the little isle was sun-warm. The green plants gave us shelter for our heads. We had food and drink in plenty. And to crown all, we were within sight of safety. As soon as the shearers quit their work and the dusk began to fall, we waded ashore and struck for the bridge of Stirling, keeping the fields and under the field fences. The bridge is close under the castle hill, an old, high, narrow bridge with pinnacles along the parapet, and you may conceive with how much interest I looked upon it, not only as a place famous in history, but as the very doors of salvation to Allen and myself. The moon was not yet up when we came there. A few lights shone along the front of the fortress, and lower down a few lighted windows in the town, but it was almighty still, and there seemed to be no guard upon the passage. I was for pushing straight across, but Allen was more wary. "It looks unco quiet," said he, "but for all that we'll lie down here cannily behind a dike and make sure." So we lay for about a quarter of an hour, whiles whispering, whiles lying still and hearing nothing earthly but the washing of the water on the piers. At last there came by an old, hobbling woman with a crutch stick, who first stopped a little, close to where we lay, and bemoaned herself in the long way she had traveled, and then set forth again up the steep spring of the bridge. The woman was so little and the night still so dark that we soon lost sight of her, only heard the sound of her steps and her stick and a cough that she had by fits draw slowly farther away. "She's bound to be across now," I whispered. "Nah," said Allen. "Her foot still sounds, boss, 32th upon the bridge." 32 hollow. And just then, "Who goes?" cried a voice, and we heard the butt of a musket rattle on the stones. I must suppose the sentry had been sleeping, so that had we tried, we might have passed unseen, but he was awake now, and the chance forfeited. "This'll never do," said Allen. "This'll never do for us, David." And without another word, he began to crawl away through the fields, and a little after, being well out of eyeshot, got his feet again, and struck along a road that led to the eastward. I could not conceive what he was doing, and indeed I was so sharply cut by the disappointment that I was little likely to be pleased with anything. A moment back, and I had seen myself knocking at Mr. Rankiller's door to claim my inheritance, like a hero in a ballad, and here was I back again, a wandering, hunted blackguard on the wrong side of Forth. "Well," said I. "Well," said Allen, "what would ye have? They're none such fools as I took them for. We have still the Forth to pass, Davy. Weary fall the rains that fed, and the hillsides that guided it." "And why go east?" said I. "Oh, just upon the chance," said he. "If we can't pass the river, we'll have to see what we can do for Firth." "There are fords upon the river, and none upon the Firth," said I. "To be sure there are fords, and a bridge forby," quoth Allen. "And of what service, when they are watched?" "Well," said I, "but a river can be swum." "By them that have the skill of it," returned he. "But I have yet to hear that either you or me is much of a hand at that exercise, and for my own part, I swim like a stone." "I'm not up to you in talking back, Allen," I said, "but I can see we're making bad worse. If it's hard to pass a river, it stands to reason it must be worse to pass a sea." "But there's such a thing as a boat," says Allen, "or I'm the more deceived." "Aye, and such a thing as money," says I. "But for us that have neither one nor other, they might just as well not have been invented." "Ye think so?" said Allen. "I do that," said I. "David," says he, "ye're a man of small invention and less faith. But let me set my wits upon the hone, and if I can't beg, borrow, nor yet steal a boat, I'll make one." "I think I see ye," said I, "and what's more than all that, if ye pass a bridge you can tell no tales, but if we pass the Firth, there's a boat on the wrong side. Somebody must have brought it. The countryside will all be in a biz dash." "Man," cried Allen, "if I make a boat, I'll make a body to take it back again. So deave me with no more of your nonsense, but walk, for that's what you got to do, and let Alan think for ye. All night, then, we walked to the north side of the Carse under the high line of the Ocho Mountains, and by a low in Clackmannan and Culross, all which we avoided, and about 10 in the morning, mighty hungry and tired, came to the little Clachan of Limekills. This is a place that sits near and by the waterside, and looks across the Hope to the town of the Queensferry. Smoke went up from both of these, and from other villages and farms upon all hands. The fields were being reaped. 2 ships lay anchored, and boats were coming and going on the Hope. It was altogether a right pleasant sight to me, and I could not take my fill of gazing at these comfortable, green, cultivated hills and the busy people both of the field and sea. For all that, there was Mr. Rankiller's house on the south shore, where I had no doubt well awaited me. And here was I upon the north, clad in poor enough attire of an outlandish fashion, with 3 silver shillings left me of all my fortune, a price set upon my head, and an outlawed man for my sole company. "Oh, Alan," said I, "to think of it, over there's all that heart could want waiting me. And the birds go over, and the boats go over, all that please can go. But just me only. Oh, man, but it's a heartbreak." In Limekills we entered a small change house, which we only knew to be a public by the wand over the door, and bought some bread and cheese from a good-looking lass that was a servant. This we carried with us in a bundle, meaning to sit and eat it in a bush of wood on the seashore, that we saw some third part a mile in front. As we went, I kept looking across the water and sighing to myself, and though I took no heed of it, Alan had fallen into a muse. At last he stopped in the way. "Did ye take heed of the lass we bought this of?" says he, tapping on the bread and cheese. "To be sure," said I, "and a bonny lass she was." "Ye thought that?" cries he. "Man, David, that's good news." "In the name of all that's wonderful, why so?" says I. "What good can that do?" "Well," said Alan, with one of his droll looks, "I was rather in hopes it would maybe get us that boat." "If it were the other way about, it would be liker it," said I. "That's all that you can, ye see," said Alan. "I don't want a lass to fall in love with ye. I want her to be sorry for ye, David, to which end there is no manner of need that she should take you for a beauty. Let me see," looking me curiously over. "I wish ye were a wee thing paler, but apart from that ye'll do fine for my purpose. Ye have a fine hang-dog, rag and tatter, clap-macaw kind of look to ye, as if ye had stolen the coat from a potato bogle. Come, right about, and back to the change house for that boat of ours." I followed him, laughing. "David Balfour," said he, "you're a very funny gentleman by your way of it, and this is a very funny employ for ye, no doubt. For all that, if ye have any affection for my neck, to say nothing of your own, you will perhaps be kind enough to take this matter responsibly. I am going to do a bit of play acting, the bottom ground of which is just exactly as serious as the gallows for pair of us. So bear it, if you please, in mind, and conduct yourself according." "Well, well," said I, "have it as you will." As we got near the Clachan, he made me take his arm and hang upon it, like one almost helpless with weariness, and by the time he pushed open the change-house door, he seemed to be half carrying me. The maid appeared surprised, as well she might be, at our speedy return, but Alan had no words to spare for her in explanation, helped me to a chair, called for a tass of brandy with which he fed me in little sips, and then breaking up the bread and cheese helped me to eat it like a nursery lass, the whole with that grave, concerned, affectionate countenance that might have imposed upon a judge. It was small wonder if the maid were taken with the picture we presented, of a poor, sick, overwrought lad and his most tender comrade. She drew quite near, and stood leaning with her back on the next table. "What's like wrong with him?" said she at last. Alan turned upon her, to my great wonder, with a kind of fury. "Wrong!" cries he. "He's walked more hundreds of miles than he has hairs upon his chin, and slept oftener in wet heather than dry sheets." "Wrong! Quo, she? Wrong enough, I would think." "Wrong indeed!" And he kept grumbling to himself as he fed me, like a man ill-pleased. "He's young for the like of that," said the maid. "Ower young," said Alan with his back to her. "He would be better riding," says she. "And where could I get a horse to him?" cried Alan, turning on her with the same appearance of fury. "Would ye have me steal?" I thought this roughness would have sent her off in dudgeon, as indeed it closed her mouth for the time. But my companion knew very well what he was doing, and for as simple as he was in some things of life, had a great fund of roguishness in such affairs as these. "Ye need tell me," she said at last. "You read gentry?" "Well," said Allen, softened a little, I believe against his will, by this artless comment. "And suppose we were? Did ever you hear that gentries put money in folks' pockets?" She sighed at this, as if she were herself some disinherited great lady. "No," says she, "that's true indeed." I was all this while chafing at the part one played, and sitting tongue-tied between shame and merriment. But somehow at this I could hold in no longer, and bade Allen let me be, for I was better already. My voice stuck in my throat, for I ever hated to take part in lies. But my very embarrassment helped on the plot, for the last no doubt set down my husky voice to sickness and fatigue. "Has he nae friends?" said she in a tearful voice. "That has he so," cried Allen, "if we could but win to them. Friends and rich friends, beds a lying, food to eat, doctors to see to him, and here he must tramp in the dubs and sleep in the heather like a beggar man." "And why that?" says the lass. "My dear," said Allen, "I can't very safely say, but I'll tell you what I'll do instead. Says he, I'll whistle ye a bit tune." And with that he leaned pretty far over the table, and in a mere breath of whistle, but with a wonderful pretty sentiment, gave her a few bars of "Charlie is my darling." "Wheesht," says she, and looked over her shoulder to the door. "That's it," said Allen. "And him so young," cries the lass. "He's old enough to—" and Allen struck his forefinger on the back part of his neck, meaning that I was old enough to lose my head. "It would be a black shame," she cried, flushing high. "It's what will be, though," said Allen, "unless we manage the better." At this the lass turned and ran out of that part of the house, leaving us alone together, Allen in high good humor at the furthering of his schemes, and I in bitter dudgeon at being called a Jacobite and treated like a child. "Allen," I cried, "I can stand no more of this." "Ye'll have to sit it then, Davy," said he, "for if ye upset the pot now, you may scrape your own life out of fire, but Allen Breck is a dead man." This was so true that I could only groan, and even my groan served Allen's purpose, for it was overheard by the lass as she came flying again with a dish of white puddings and a bottle of strong ale. "Poor lamb," says she, and had no sooner set the meat before us, than she touched me on the shoulder with a little friendly touch, as much as to bid me cheer up. Then she told us to fall to, and there would be no more to pay, for the inn was her own, or at least her father's, and he was gone for the day to Pittencrieff. We waited for no second bidding, for bread and cheeses but cold comfort, and the pudding smelt excellently well. And while we sat and ate, she took up that same place by the next table, looking on and thinking and frowning to herself, and drawing the string of her apron through her hand. "I'm thinking ye have rather a long tongue," she said at last to Allen. I said, "Allen, but ye see I ken the folk I speak to." "I would never betray ye," said she, "if ye mean that." "No," said he, "ye're not that kind. But I'll tell ye what ye would do. Ye would help." "I couldn't," said she, shaking her head. "Na, I couldn't." "No," said he, "but if ye could—" She answered him nothing. "Look here, my lass," said Allen. "There are boats in the kingdom of Fife, for I saw two, no less, upon the beach, as I came in by your town's end. Now, if we could have a use of a boat to pass under cloud of night into Lothian, and some secret, decent kind of man to bring that boat back again and keep his counsel, there will be 2 souls saved, mine to all likelihood, his to a dead surety. If we lack that boat, we have but 3 shillings left in this wide world, and where to go and how to do, and what other place there is for us except to change the gibbet. I give you my naked word, I kenna. Shall we go wanting, lassie? Are ye to lie in your warm bed and think upon us, when the wind gowls in the chimney and the rain tirls on the roof? Are ye to eat your meat by the cheeks of a red fire, and think upon this poor sick lad of mine, biting his finger ends on a blade muir for cold and hunger? Sick or sound, he must I be moving. With the death grapple at his throat, he must I be trailing in the rain on the lang roads, and when he gants his last on a rickle called Staines, there will be nae friends near him, but only me and God." At this appeal, I could see the lass was in great trouble of mind, being tempted to help us, and yet in some fear she might be helping malefactors. And so now I determined to step in myself, and to allay her scruples with a portion of the truth. "Did ever you hear," said I, "of Mr. Rankeeler the fairy?" "Rankeeler the writer?" said she. "I dore say that." "Well," said I, "it's to his door that I am bound. So you may judge by that if I am an ill doer. And I will tell you more, that though I am indeed by a dreadful error in some peril of my life, King George has no truer friend in all Scotland than myself." Her face cleared up mightily at this, although Alan's darkened. "That's more than I would ask," said she. "Mr. Rankeeler is a Kent man." And she bade us finish our meat, get clear of the clocking as soon as might be, and lie close in the bitwood on the sea beach. "And ye can trust me," says she, "I'll find some means to put you over." At this we waited for no more, but shook hands with her upon the bargain, made short work of the puddings, and set forth again from Limekills as far as to the wood. It was a small piece of perhaps a score of elders and hawthorns and a few young ashes, not thick enough to veil us from passers-by upon the road or beach. Here we must lie, however, making the best of the brave warm weather and the good hopes we now had of deliverance, and planning more particularly what remained for us to do. We had but one trouble all day, when a strolling piper came and sat in the same wood with us, a red-nosed, bleary, drunken dog, with a great bottle of whiskey in his pocket, and a long story of wrongs that had been done him by all sorts of persons, from the Lord President of Court Session, who had denied him justice, down to the bailies of Inverkeithing, who had given him more of it than he desired. It was impossible but he should conceive some suspicion of two men lying all day concealed in a thicket, and having no business to allege. As long as he stayed there, he kept us in hot water with prying questions, and after he was gone, as he was a man not very likely to hold his tongue, we were in the greater impatience to be gone ourselves. The day came to an end with the same brightness. The night fell quiet and clear. Lights came out in houses and hamlets, and then, one after another, began to be put out. But it was past 11, and we were long since strangely tortured with anxieties, before we heard the grinding of oars upon the rowing pins. At that, we looked out and saw the lass herself coming rowing to us in a boat. She had trusted no one with our affairs, not even her sweetheart, if she had one, but as soon as her father was asleep, had left the house by a window, stolen a neighbor's boat, and come to our assistance single-handed. I was abashed how to find expression for my thanks, but she was no less abashed at the thought of hearing them, begged us to lose no time and to hold our peace, saying very properly that the heart of our matter was in haste and silence, and so, what with one thing and another, she had set us on the Lothian shore not far from Cerridon, had shaken hands with us, and was out again at sea and rowing for Limekills, before there was one word said either of her service or our gratitude. Even after she was gone, we had nothing to say, as indeed nothing was enough for such a kindness. Only Alan stood a grate, while upon the shore, shaking his head. "David, it is a very fine lass. It is a very fine lass," he said at last. "David, it is a very fine lass." And a matter of an hour later, as we were lying in a den on the seashore and I had been already dozing, he broke out again in commendations of her character. For my part, I could say nothing. She was so simple a creature that my heart smote me both with remorse and fear. Remorse because we had traded upon her ignorance, and fear lest we should have any way involved her in the dangers of our situation. Chapter 27. I come to Mr. Rankeeler. The next day it was agreed that Alan should fend for himself till sunset, but as soon as it began to grow dark, he should lie in the fields by the roadside near to Newhalls, and stir for naught until he heard me whistling. At first I proposed I should give him for a signal the bonny house of Airlie, which was a favourite of mine, but he objected that as the piece was very commonly known, any ploughman might whistle by accident, and taught me instead a little fragment of a Highland air, which has run in my head from that day to this, and will likely run in my head when I lie dying. Every time it comes to me, it takes me off to that last day of my uncertainty, with Alan sitting up in the bottom of the den, whistling and beating the measure with a finger, and the grey of the dawn coming on his face. I was in the long street of Queensferry before the sun was up. It was a fairly built burg, the houses of good stone, many-slated. The town hall not so fine, I thought, as that of Peebles, nor yet the street so noble. But take it altogether, it put me to shame for my foul tatters. As the morning went on, and the fires began to be kindled, and the windows to open, and the people to peer out of houses, my concern and despondency grew ever the blacker. I saw now that I had no grounds to stand upon, and no clear proof of my rights, nor so much as of my own identity. If it was all a bubble, I was indeed sorely cheated and left in a sore pass. Even if things were as I conceived, it would in all likelihood take time to establish my contentions. And what time had I to spare with less than 3 shillings in my pocket and a condemned, hunted man upon my hands to ship out of the country? Truly, if my hope broke with me, it might come to the gallows yet for both of us. And as I continued to walk up and down and saw people looking askance at me upon the street or out of windows, and nudging or speaking one to another with smiles, I began to take a fresh apprehension that it might be no easy matter even to come to speech of the lawyer, far less to convince him of my story. For the life of me, I could not muster up the courage to address any of these reputable burghers. I thought shame even to speak with them in such a pickle of rags and dirt. And if I had asked for the house of such a man as Mr. Rankeeler, I suppose they would have burst out laughing in my face. So I went up and down and through the street and down to Harborside, like a dog that has lost its master, with a strange gnawing of my inwards, and every now and then a movement of despair. It grew to be high day at last, perhaps 9 in the forenoon, and I was worn with these wanderings, and chanced to stop in front of a very good house on the landward side, a house with beautiful, clear glass windows, flowering knots upon the sills, the walls new Harald 33, and a chase dog sitting yawning on the step, like one that was a home. Well, I was even envying this dumb brute, when the door fell open and there issued forth a shrewd, ruddy, kindly, consequential man in a well-powdered wig and spectacles. I was in such a plight that no one set eyes on me once, but he looked at me again, and this gentleman, as it proved, was so much struck with my poor appearance that he came straight up to me and asked me what I did. 33 newly rough-cast. I told him I was come to Queensferry on business, and taking heart of grace, asked him to direct me to the house of Mr. Rankeeler. "Why," said he, "that is his house that I had just come out of, and for a rather singular chance, I am that very man." "Then, sir," said I have to beg the favor of an interview." "I do not know your name," said he, "nor yet your face." "My name is David Balfour," said I. "David Balfour?" he repeated, in rather a high tone, like one surprised. "And where have you come from, Mr. David Balfour?" he asked, looking me pretty drilly in the face. "I have come from a great many strange places, sir," said I, "but I think it would be as well to tell you where and how in a more private manner." He seemed to muse a while, holding his lip in his hand, and looking now at me and now upon the causeway of the street. "Yes," says he, "that will be the best, no doubt." And he led me back with him into his house, cried out to someone whom I could not see that he would be engaged all morning, and brought me into a little dusty chamber full of books and documents. Here he sate down and bade me be seated, though I thought he looked a little ruefully from his clean chair to my muddy rags. "And now," says he, "if you have any business, pray be brief and come swiftly to the point. And he see gemino bellum trojanum order ob ovo. Do you understand that?" says he, with a keen look. Here he sate down and bade me be seated. "I will even do as Horace says, sir," I answered, smiling, "and carry you in medias res." He nodded as if he was well pleased, and indeed a scrap of Latin had been set to test me. For all that, and though I was somewhat encouraged, the blood came in my face when I added, "I have reason to believe myself some rights on the state of Shaw's." He got a paper book out of a drawer and set it before him open. "Well," said he, but I had shot my bolt and sat speechless. Come, Mr. Balfour," said he, "you must continue. Where were you born?" "In Ascendian, sir," said I, "the year 1733, the 12th of March." He seemed to follow this statement in his paper book, but what that meant I knew not. "Your father and mother?" said he. "My father was Alexander Balfour, schoolmaster of that place," said I, "and my mother Grace Pedero. I think her people were from Angus." "Have you any papers proving your identity?" asked Mr. Rankeeler. "No, sir," said I, "but they are in the hands of Mr. Campbell, the minister, and could be readily produced. Mr. Campbell, too, would give me his word, and for that matter, I do not think my uncle would deny me." "Meaning Mr. Ebenezer Balfour?" says he. "The same," said I. "Whom you have seen?" he asked. "By whom I was received into his own house," I answered. "Did you ever meet a man of the name of Hoseason?" asked Mr. Rankeeler. I did so, sir, for my sins, said I, for it was by his means and procurement of my uncle that I was kidnapped within sight of this town, carried to sea, suffered shipwreck and 100 other hardships, and stand before you today in this poor accoutrement. You say you were shipwrecked, said Rankeeler. Where was that? Off the south end of the Isle of Mull, said I. The name of the isle on which I was cast up is the island Earaid. Ah, says he, smiling, you are deeper than me in the geography, but so far, I may tell you, this agrees pretty exactly with other informations that I hold. But you say you were kidnapped. In what sense? In the plain meaning of the word, sir, said I. I was on my way to your house when I was japanned on board the brig, cruelly struck down, thrown below, and knew no more of anything till we were far at sea. I was destined for plantations, a fate that, in God's providence, I have escaped. The brig was lost on June the 27th, says he, looking in his book, and we are now at August the 24th. Here is a considerable hiatus, Mr. Balfour, of near upon 2 months. It has already caused a vast amount of trouble to your friends, and I own I shall not be very well contented until it is set right. Indeed, sir, said I, these months are very easily filled up, but yet before I told my story, I would be glad to know that I was talking to a friend. This is to argue in a circle, said the lawyer. I cannot be convinced till I have heard you. I cannot be your friend till I am properly informed. If you were more trustful, it would better befit your time of life. And you know, Mr. Balfour, we have a proverb in the country that evildoers are evil dreaders. You are not to forget, sir, said I, that I have already suffered by my trustfulness, and was shipped off to be a slave by the very man that, if I rightly understand, is your employer. All this while I have been gaining ground with Mr. Rankeeler, and in proportion as I gain ground, gaining confidence. But at this sally, which I made with something of a smile myself, he fairly laughed aloud. No, no, said he, it is not so bad as that. Fui non-sum. I was indeed your uncle's man of business, but while you, imberbes Juvenis custo remoto, were gallivanting the west, a good deal of water has run under the bridges. And if your ears did not sing, it was not for lack of being talked about. On the very day of your sea disaster, Mr. Campbell stalked into my office, demanding you from all the winds. I had never heard of your existence, but I had known your father, and from matters of my competence, to be touched upon hereafter, I was disposed to fear the worst. Mr. Ebenezer admitted having seen you, declared, what seemed improbable, that he had given you considerable sums, and that you had started for the continent of Europe, intending to fulfill your education, which was probable and praiseworthy. Interrogated how you had come to send no word to Mr. Campbell. He deponed that you had expressed a great desire to break with your past life. Further interrogated where you now were, protested ignorance, but believed you were in Leiden. That is a close sum of his replies. I am not exactly sure that anyone believed him, continued Mr. Rankeeler with a smile, and in particular he so much disrelished me expressions of mine that, in a word, he showed me to the door. We were then at a full stand. For whatever shrewd suspicions we might entertain, we had no shadow of probation. In the very article, comes Captain Oseason with the story of your drowning, whereupon all fell through, with no consequences but concern to Mr. Campbell, injury to my pocket, and another blot upon your uncle's character, which could very ill afford it. And now, Mr. Balfour, said he, you understand the whole process of these matters, and can judge for yourself to what extent I may be trusted. Indeed, he was more pedantic than I can represent him, and placed more scraps of Latin in his speech. But it was all uttered with a fine geniality of eye and manner, which went far to conquer my distrust. Moreover, I could see he now treated me as if I was myself beyond a doubt, so that first point of my identity seemed fully granted. Sir, said I, if I tell you my story, I must commit a friend's life to your discretion. Pass me your word it shall be sacred, and for what touches myself, I will ask no better guarantee than just your face. He passed me his word very seriously. But, said he, these are rather alarming prolocutions, and if there are in your story any little jostles of the law, I would beg you to bear in mind that I am a lawyer and pass lightly. Thereupon I told him my story from the first, he listening with his spectacles thrust up and his eyes closed, so that I sometimes feared he was asleep, but no such matter. He heard every word, as I found afterward, with such quickness of hearing and precision of memory as often surprised me. Even strange, outlandish Gaelic names, heard for that time only, he remembered and would remind me of years after. Yet, when I called Alan Breck in full, we had an odd scene. The name of Alan had of course rung through Scotland, with the news of the Appin murder and the offer of the reward, and it had no sooner escaped me than the lawyer moved in his seat and opened his eyes. "I would name no unnecessary names, Mr. Balfour," said he, "above all of Highlanders, many of whom are obnoxious to the law." "Well, it might have been better not," said I, "but since I have let it slip, I may as well continue." "Not at all," said Mr. Rankeeler. "I am somewhat dull of hearing, as you may have remarked, and I am far from sure I caught the name exactly. We will call your friend, if you please, Mr. Thompson, that there may be no reflections, and in future I would take some such way with any Highlander that you may have to mention, dead or alive." By this, I saw he must have heard the name all too clearly, and had already guessed I might be coming to murder. If he chose to play this part of ignorance, it was no matter of mine. So I smiled, said it was no very Highland-sounding name, and consented. Through all the rest of my story, Alan was Mr. Thompson, which amused me the more, as it was a piece of policy after his own heart. James Stewart, in like manner, was mentioned under the style of Mr. Thompson's kinsman. Colin Campbell passed as a Mr. Glenn. And to Clooney, when I came to that part of my tale, I gave the name of Mr. Jameson, a Highland chief. It was truly the most open farce, and I wondered that the lawyer should care to keep it up. But, after all, it was quite in the taste of that age, when there were two parties in state, and quiet persons, with no very high opinions of their own, sought out every cranny to avoid offense to either. "Well, well," said the lawyer when I had quite done, "this is a great epic, a great odyssey of yours. You must tell it, sir, in a sound Latinity when your scholarship is riper, or in English, if you please, though for my part one prefer the stronger tongue. You have rolled much. Que regio in terris, what parish in Scotland, to make a homely translation, has not been filled with your wanderings? You have shown, besides, a singular aptitude for getting into false positions, and yes, upon the whole, for behaving well in them. This Mr. Thompson seems to me a gentleman of some choice qualities, though perhaps a trifle bloody-minded. It would please me none the worse if, with all his merits, he were soused in the North Sea, for the man, Mr. David, is a sore embarrassment. But you are doubtless quite right to adhere to him. Indubitably, he adhered to you. It comes, we may say, he was your true companion, nor less paribus curries vestigia fidget, for I dare say you would both take an hour of thought upon the gallows. Well, well, these days are fortunately by, and I think, speaking humanly, that you are near the end of your troubles. As he thus moralized on my adventures, he looked upon me with so much humor and benignity that I could scarce contain my satisfaction. I had been so long wandering with lawless people, and making my bed upon the hills and under the bare sky, that to sit once more in a clean, covered house, and to talk amicably with gentlemen in broadcloth, seemed mighty elevations. Even as I thought so, my eye fell on my unseemly tatters, and I was once more plunged in confusion. But the lawyer saw and understood me. He rose, called over the stair to lay another plate, for Mr. Balfour would stay to dinner, and led me into a bedroom in the upper part of the house. Here he set before me water and soap and a comb, and laid out some clothes that belonged to his son. And here, with another apposite tag, he left me to my toilet. Chapter 28. I go in quest of my inheritance, having made what change I could in my appearance. And blithe was I to look in the glass, and find the beggar man a thing of the past, and David Balfour come to life again. And yet I was ashamed of the change, too, and above all of the borrowed clothes. When I had done, Mr. Rankeeler caught me on the stair, made me his compliments, and had me again into the cabinet. "Sit ye down, Mr. David," said he. "And now that you are looking a little more like yourself, let me see if I can find you any news. You will be wondering, no doubt, about your father and your uncle? To be sure, it is a singular tale, and the explanation is one that I blush to have to offer you. For," says he, really with embarrassment, "the matter hinges on a love affair." "Truly," said I cannot very well join that notion with my uncle. But your uncle, Mr. David, was not always old, replied the lawyer, and what may perhaps surprise you more, not always ugly. He had a fine gallant air. People stood in their doors to look after him as he went by upon a metal horse. I have seen it with these eyes, and I ingenuously confess, not altogether without envy, for I was a plain lad myself and a plain man's son, and in those days it was a case of odi cabellus es, Sibel. It sounds like a dream, said I. Aye, said the lawyer. That is how it is with youth and age. Nor was that all. But he had a spirit of his own that seemed to promise great things in the future. In 1715, what must he do but run away to join the rebels? It was your father that pursued him, found him in a ditch, and brought him back multum gementem, to the mirth of the whole country. However, majora canimus, the two lads fell in love, and that with the same lady. Mr. Ebenezer, who was the admired and beloved and the spoiled one, made no doubt mighty certain of the victory, and when he found he deceived himself, screamed like a peacock. The whole country heard of it. Now he lay sick at home, with his silly family standing round a bed in tears. Now he rode from public house to public house, and shouted his sorrows into the lug of Tom, Dick, and Harry. Your father, Mr. David, was a kind gentleman, but he was weak, dolefully weak, took all this folly with a long countenance, and one day, by your leave, resigned the lady. She was no such fool, however. It's from her you must inherit your excellent good sense. And she refused to be bandied from one to another. Both got upon their knees to her, and the upshot of the matter for that while was that she showed both of them the door. That was in August. Dear me, the same year I came from college. The scene must have been highly farcical. I thought myself it was a silly business, but I could not forget my father had a hand in it. Surely, sir, it had some note of tragedy, said I. Why, no, sir, not at all, returned the lawyer. For tragedy implies some ponderable matter in dispute, some dignus vindice notice. And this piece of work was all about the petulance of a young ass that had been spoiled and wanted nothing so much as to be tied up and soundly belted. However, that was not your father's view, and the end of it was that from concession to concession on your father's part, and from one height to another of squalling, sentimental selfishness upon your uncle's, they came at last to drive a sort of bargain, from whose ill results you have recently been smarting. The one man took the lady, the other the estate. Now, Mr. David, they talk a great deal of charity and generosity, but in this disputable state of life, I often think the happiest consequences seem to flow when a gentleman consults his lawyer and takes all the law allows him. Anyhow, this piece of quixotry on your father's part, as it was unjust in itself, has brought forth a monstrous family of injustices. Your father and mother lived and died poor folk. You were poorly reared. And in the meanwhile, what a time it has been for the tenants on the estate of Shaw's. And I might add, if it was a matter I care much about, what a time for Mr. Ebenezer. And yet that is certainly the strangest part of all, said I, that a man's nature should thus change. True, said Mr. Rankeeler, and yet I imagine it was natural enough. He could not think that he had played a handsome part. Those who knew the story gave him the cold shoulder. Those who knew it not, seeing one brother disappear and the other succeed in the estate, raised a cry of murder, so that upon all sides he found himself a vite. Money was all he got by his bargain. Well, he came to think the more money. He was selfish when he was young. He is selfish now that he is old. And the latter end of all these pretty manners and fine feelings you have seen for yourself. Well, sir, said I, and in all this what is my position? The estate is yours beyond a doubt, replied the lawyer. It matters nothing what your father signed. You're the heir of entail. But your uncle is a man to fight the indefensible, and it would be likely your identity that he would call in question. A lawsuit is always expensive, and a family lawsuit always scandalous. Besides which, if any of your doings with your friend Mr. Thompson were to come out, we might find that we had burned our fingers. The kidnapping, to be sure, would be a court card upon our side, if we could only prove it. But it may be difficult to prove, and my advice upon the whole is to make a very easy bargain with your uncle, perhaps even leaving him at Shaw's where he has taken root for a quarter of a century, and contenting yourself in the meanwhile with a fair provision. I told him I was very willing to be easy, and that to carry family concerns before the public was a step from which I was naturally much averse. In the meantime, thinking to myself, I began to see the outlines of that scheme on which we afterwards acted. The great affair, I asked, is to bring home to him the kidnapping? Surely, said Mr. Rankeeler, and if possible out of court. For mark you here, Mr. David, we could no doubt find some men of the Covenant who would swear to your reclusion, but once they were in the box, we can no longer check their testimony, and some word of your friend Mr. Thompson must certainly crop out, which, from what you let fall, I cannot think to be desirable. Well, sir, said I, here is my way of it, and I opened my plot to him. But this would seem to involve my meeting the man Thompson, says he, when I had done. I think so, indeed, sir, said I. Dear doctor, cries he, rubbing his brow. Dear doctor, no, Mr. David, I am afraid your scheme is inadmissible. I say nothing against your friend, Mr. Thompson. I know nothing against him, and if I did, mark this, Mr. David, it would be my duty to lay hands on him. Now I put it to you, is it wise to meet? He may have matters to his charge. He may not have told you all. His name may not be even Thompson, cries the lawyer, twinkling. For some of these fellows will pick up names by the roadside as another would gather haws. You must be the judge, sir, said I. But it was clear my plan had taken hold upon his fancy, for he kept musing to himself till we were called to dinner in the company of Mrs. Rankeeler, and that lady had scarce left us again to ourselves and a bottle of wine, ere he was back harping on my proposal. When and where was I to meet my friend Mr. Thompson? Was I sure of Mr. T.'s discretion? Suppose we could catch the old fox tripping, would I consent to such and such a term of an agreement? These and like questions he kept asking at long intervals, while he thoughtfully rolled his wine upon his tongue. When I had answered all of them, seemingly to his contentment, he fell into a still deeper muse, even the claret being now forgotten. Then he got a sheet of paper and a pencil, and set to work writing and weighing every word, and at last touched the bell and had his clerk into the chamber. Torrance, said he, I must have this written out fair against the night, and when it is done, you will be so kind as put on your hat, and be ready to come along with this gentleman and me, for you will probably be wanted as a witness. What, sir, cried I, as soon as the clerk was gone, are you to venture it? Why, so it would appear, says he, filling his glass. But let's speak no more of business. The very sight of Torrance brings in my head a little droll matter of some years ago, when I made a tryst with a poor oaf at the cross of Edinburgh. Each had gone his proper errand, and when it came 4 o'clock, Torrance had been taking a glass and did not know his master, and I, who forgot my spectacles, was so blind without them that I give you my word I did not know my own clerk. And thereupon he laughed heartily. I said it was an odd chance, and smiled out of politeness. But what held me all the afternoon in wonder, he kept returning and dwelling on this story, and telling it again with fresh details and laughter, so that I began at last to be quite put out of countenance, and feel ashamed for my friend's folly. Toward the time I had appointed with Allen, we set out from the house, Mr. Rankeeler and I arm in arm, and Torrance following behind with the deed in his pocket and a covered basket in his hand. All through the town, the lawyer was bowing right and left, and continually being buttonholed by gentlemen on matters of burgh or private business, and I could see he was one greatly looked up to in the county. At last we were clear of the houses, and began to go along the side of the haven, and toward the Hawes Inn and the Ferry Pier, the scene of my misfortune. I could not look upon the place without emotion, recalling how many that had been there with me that day were now no more, ransom taken. I could hope from the evil to come, Schwan passed where I dared not follow him, and the poor souls that had gone down with the brig in her last plunge. All these and the brig herself I had outlived, and come through these hardships and fearful perils without scath. My only thought should have been of gratitude, and yet I could not behold the place without sorrow for others and a chill of recollected fear. I was so thinking when, upon a sudden, Mr. Rankeeler cried out, clapped his hand to his pockets, and began to laugh. Why, he cries, if this be not a farcical adventure, after all that I said, I have forgot my glasses. At that, of course, I understood the purpose of his anecdote, and knew that if he had left the spectacles at home, it had been done on purpose, so that he might have the benefit of Allen's help without the awkwardness of recognizing him. And indeed it was well thought upon. For now, suppose things go the very worst, how could Rankeeler swear to my friend's identity, or how be made to bear damaging evidence against myself. For all that, he had been a long while of finding out his want, and had spoken to and recognized a good few persons as we came to the town, and I had little doubt myself that he saw reasonably well. As soon as we were past the halls, where I recognized the landlord smoking his pipe in the door, and was amazed to see him look no older, Mr. Rankeeler changed the order of march, walking behind with Torrance and sending me forward in the manner of a scout. I went up the hill, whistling from time to time my Gaelic air, and at length I had the pleasure to hear it answered and to see Alan rise from behind a bush. He was somewhat dashed in spirits, having passed a long day alone skulking in the county, and made but poor meal in an alehouse near Dundas. But at the mere sight of my clothes he began to brighten up, and as soon as I had told him in what a forward state our matters were, and the part one looked to him to play in what remained, he sprang into a new man. "And that is a very good notion of yours," says he, "and I dare to say that you could lay your hands upon no better man to put it through than Alan Breck. It is not a thing, mark ye, that any one could do, but takes a gentleman of penetration. But it sticks in my head your lawyer man will be somewhat wearying to see me," says Alan. Accordingly, I cried and waved on Mr. Rankeeler, who came up alone, and was presented to my friend, Mr. Thompson. "Mr. Thompson, I am pleased to meet you," said he, "but I have forgotten my glasses, and our friend, Mr. David here," clapping me on the shoulder, "will tell you that I am little better than blind, and that you must not be surprised if I pass you by tomorrow." This he said, thinking that Alan would be pleased, but the Highlandman's vanity was ready to startle at a less matter than that. "Why, sir," says he stiffly, "I would say it mattered the less, as we are met here for a particular end, to see justice done to Mr. Balfour, and by what I can see, not very likely to have much else in common. But I accept your apology, which was a very proper one to make." "And that is more than I could look for, Mr. Thompson," said Rankeeler heartily. "And now, as you and I are the chief actors in this enterprise, I think we should come into a nice agreement, to which end I propose that you should lend me your arm, for what with the dusk and one of my glasses, I am not very clear as to the path. And as for you, Mr. David, you will find Torrance a pleasant kind of body to speak with. Only let me remind you, it's quite needless he should hear more of your adventures, or those of Mr. Thompson." Accordingly, these two went on ahead in very close talk, and Torrance and I brought up the rear. Night was quite come when we came in view of the house of Shaw's. 10 had been gone some time. It was dark and mild, with a pleasant, rustling wind in the southwest that covered the sound of our approach, and as we drew near we saw no glimmer of light in any portion of the building. It seemed my uncle was already in bed, which was indeed the best thing for our arrangements. We made our last whispered consultation some 50 yards away, and then the lawyer and Torrance and I crept quietly up and crouched down beside the corner of the house, and as soon as we were in our places, Alan strode to the door without concealment and began to knock. Chapter 29. I come into my kingdom. For some time Alan volleyed upon the door, and his knocking only roused the echoes of the house and neighborhood. At last, however, I could hear the noise of a window gently thrust up, and knew that my uncle had come to his observatory. By what light there was, he would see Alan standing like a dark shadow on the steps. The 3 witnesses were hidden quite out of his view, so that there was nothing to alarm an honest man in his own house. For all that, he studied his visitor a while in silence, and when he spoke his voice had a quaver of misgiving. "What's this?" says he. "This is nae kind of time of night for decent folk, and I hae nae trokings 34 why night hawks. What brings ye here?" "I have a blunderbush." 34 dealings. "Is that your cell, Mr. Balfour?" returned Alan, stepping back and looking up into the darkness. "Have a care of that blunderbuss. They're nasty things to burst." "What brings ye here?" "And where are ye?" says my uncle angrily. "I have no manner of inclination to road out my name to the countryside," said Alan. "But what brings me here is another story, being more your affair than mine. And if ye're sure it's what you like, I'll set it to a tune and sing it to you." "And what is?" asked my uncle. "David," says Alan. "What was that?" cried my uncle in a mighty changed voice. "Shall I give you the rest of the name, then?" said Alan. There was a pause, and then, "I'm thinking I'll better let ye in," says my uncle doubtfully. I dare say that, said Alan. But the point is, would I go? Now I will tell you what I am thinking. I am thinking that it is here upon this doorstep that we must confer upon this business, and shall be here or nowhere at all whatever. For I would have you to understand that I am as stiff-necked as your cell, and a gentleman of better family. This change of note disconcerted Ebenezer. He was a little while digesting it, and then says he, Well, what must be must, and shut the window. But it took him a long time to get downstairs, and a still longer to undo the fastenings, repenting, I dare say, and taken with fresh claps of fear at every second step and every bolt and bar. At last, however, we heard the creak of the hinges, and it seems my uncle slipped gingerly out, and, seeing that Alan had stepped back a pace or two, sat him down on the top doorstep with the blunderbuss ready in his hands. And now, says he, Mind I have my blunderbush, and if you take a step nearer you're as good as dade. And a very civil speech, says Alan, to be sure. Nah, says my uncle, but this is no very shanty kind of proceeding, and I'm bound be prepared. And now that we understand each other, you can name your business. Why, says Alan, you that are a man of so much understanding will doubtless perceive that I am a Hieland gentleman. My name has nae business in my story, but the county, my friends, is no very far from the Isle of Mull, of which ye will have heard. It seems there was a ship lost in those parts, and the next day a gentleman of my family was seeking wreckwood for his fire along the sands, when he came upon a lad that was half drowned. Well, he brought him to, and he and some other gentlemen took and clapped him in an auld, ruined castle, where from that day to this he has been a great expense to my friends. My friends are we wild-like, and not so particular about the law as some that I could name, and finding that the lad owned some decent folk, and was your born nephew, Mr. Balfour, they asked me to give ye a bit call and confer upon the matter. And I may tell ye at the off-go, unless we can agree upon some terms, ye are little likely to set eyes upon him. For my friends, added Alan simply, are no very well off. My uncle cleared his throat. I'm no very caring, says he. He wasn't a good lad at the best of it, and I've nae call to interfere. Aye, said Alan, I see what you would be at, pretending ye don't care to make the ransom smaller. Nah, said my uncle, it's the mere truth. I take nae manner of interest in the lad, and I'll pay nae ransom, and ye can make a kirk and a mill of him for what I care. Hoot, sir, says Alan, blood's thicker than water, in the deal's name. Ye canny desert your brother's son for fair shame of it, and if ye did, and it came to be kent, ye wouldn't be very popular in your countryside, or I'm the more deceived. I'm no just very popular the way it is, returned Ebenezer, and I didn't see how it would come to be kent. No by me, one way, nor yet by you or your friends. So that's idle talk, my bucky, says he. Then it'll have to be David that tells it, said Alan. How that? Says my uncle, sharply. Oh, just this way, says Alan. My friends would doubtless keep your nephew as long as there was any likelihood of siller to be made of it, but if there was none, I am clearly of opinion they would let him gang where he pleased, and be damned to him. Aye, but I'm no very caring about that either, said my uncle. I wouldn't be muckle made up with that. I was thinking that, said Alan. And what for why? Asked Ebenezer. Why, Mr. Balfour, replied Alan. By all that I could hear, there were two ways of it. Either ye liked David and would pay to get him back, or else ye had very good reasons for not wanting him, and would pay for us to keep him. It seems it's not the first. Well, then it's the second, and blithe am I to ken it, for it should be a pretty penny in my pocket and the pockets of my friends. I didn't follow ye there, said my uncle. No, said Alan. Well, see here, you didn't want the lad back. Well, what do you want done with him, and how much will ye pay? My uncle made no answer, but shifted uneasily on his seat. Come, sir, cried Alan, I would have you to ken that I am a gentleman. I bear a king's name. I am nae rider to kick my shanks at your hall door. Either give me an answer in civility, and that out of hand, or by the top of Glencoe, I will ram 3 feet of iron through your vitals. Man, cried my uncle, scrambling to his feet, give me a minute. What's like wrong with ye? I'm just a plain man and nae dancing master, and I'm trying to be as civil as it's morally possible. As for that wild talk, it's fair disreputable. Vitals, says you? And where would I be with my blunderbush? He snarled. Powder in your auld hands are but as a snail to the swallow against the bright steel in the hand of Allen, said the other. Before your jottering finger could find the trigger, the hilt would dirl on your breastbane. Man, ways denying it, said my uncle. Pit it as ye please. Hate your own way. I'll do naething to cross ye. Just tell me what like ye'll be wanting, and ye'll see that we can agree fine. Troth, sir, said Allen, I ask for nothing but plain dealing. In 2 words, do you want a lad killed or kept? Oh, sirs, cried Ebenezer. Oh, sirs, me. That's no kind of language. Killed or kept, repeated Allen. Oh, keep it, keep it, wailed my uncle. We'll have nae bloodshed, if you please. Well, says Allen, as ye please, that'll be the dearer. The dearer, cries Ebenezer. Would ye file your hands why crime? Hoot, said Allen, they're baith crime whatever, and the killing's easier and quicker and surer. Keeping a lad'll be a fascist 35 job, a fascist kittle business. 35 troublesome. I'll have him keep it, though, returned my uncle. I never had naething to do with a nithing morally wrong, and I'm no gone to begin to pleasure a wild Highlandman. Ye're unco scrupulous, sneered Allen. I'm a man o' principle, said Ebenezer, simply, and if I have to pay for it, I'll have to pay for it. And besides, says he, you forget the lad's my brother's son. Well, well, said Allen, and now about the price. It's no very easy for me to set a name upon it. I would first have to ken some small matters. I would have to ken, for instance, what ye gave Hosea's son at the first off-go. Hosea's son, cries my uncle, struck aback. What for? For kidnapping David, says Allen. It's a lee, it's a black lee, cried my uncle. He was never kidnapped. He lead in his throat that told ye that. Kidnapped? He never was. That's no fault of mine nor yet of yours, said Allen, nor yet of Hoseson's. It is a man that can be trusted. What do ye mean? Cried Ebenezer. Did Hosea's son tell ye? Why, ye donnered auld runt. How else would I ken? Cried Allen. Hosea's son and me are partners. We gang shares. So ye can see for yourself what good ye can do leeing. And I must plainly say ye drove a fool's bargain when you let a man like the sailor man so far forward in your private matters. But that's past praying for. And you must lie on your bed the way ye made it. And the point in hand is just this. What did ye pay him? Has he told ye him so? Asked my uncle. That's my concern, said Allen. Will, said my uncle, I dinna care what he said he lead, and the solemn God's truth is this, that I gave him £20. But I'll be perfect why honest with ye, for by that he was to have the selling of the lad in Caroliny. Wilk would be as muckle mair, but no for my pocket ye see. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. That will do excellently well, said the lawyer, stepping forward, and then mighty civilly, Good evening, Mr. Balfour, said he, and Good evening, Uncle Ebenezer, said I, and It's a braw nick, Mr. Balfour, added Torrance. My uncle just sat where he was on the top doorstep and stared upon us like a man turned to stone. Never a word said my uncle, neither black nor white, but just sat where he was on the top doorstep and stared upon us like a man turned to stone. Allen filched away his blunderbuss, and the lawyer, taking him by the arm, plucked him up from the doorstep, led him into the kitchen, whither we all followed, and set him down in a chair beside the hearth, where the fire was out and only a rushlight burning. There we all looked upon him for a while, exulting greatly in our success, but yet with a sort of pity for the man's shame. Come, Mr. Ebenezer, said the lawyer. You must not be downhearted, for I promise you we shall make easy terms. In the meanwhile, give us the cellar key, and Torrance shall draw us a bottle of your father's wine in honor of the event. Then, turning to me and taking me by the hand, Mr. David, says he, I wish you all joy in your good fortune, which I believe be deserved. And then to Allen with a spice of drollery, Mr. Thompson, I pay you my compliment. It was most artfully conducted, but in one point you somewhat outran my comprehension. Do I understand your name to be James? Or Charles? Or is it George, perhaps? And why should it be any of the three, sir? Quoth Allen, drawing himself up like one who smelled an offense. "Only, sir, that you mentioned a king's name," replied Rankeeler. "And as there has never yet been a King Thompson, or his fame at least has never come my way, I judge you must refer to that you had in baptism." This was just a stab that Alan would feel keenest, and I am free to confess he took it very ill. Not a word would he answer, but stepped off the far end of the kitchen and sat down and sulked. It was not till I stepped after him and gave him my hand and thanked him by title as the chief spring of my success that he began to smile a bit and was at last prevailed upon to join our party. By that time we had the fire lighted and a bottle of wine uncorked. A good supper came out of the basket, to which Torrance and I and Alan set ourselves down, while the lawyer and my uncle passed into the next chamber to consult. They stayed there closeted about an hour, at the end of which period they had come to a good understanding, and my uncle and I set our hands to the agreement in a formal manner. By the terms of this, my uncle bound himself to satisfy Rankeeler as to his intermissions, and to pay me 2 clear thirds of the yearly income of Shaw's. So the beggar in the ballad had come home, and when I lay down that night on the kitchen chest, I was a man of means and had a name in the country. Alan and Torrance and Rankeeler slept and snored on their hard beds, but for me who had lain out under heaven and upon dirt and stones so many days and nights, and often with an empty belly, and in fear of death, this good change in my case unmanned me more than any of the former evil ones, and I lay till dawn, looking at the fire on the roof and planning the future. Chapter 30. Goodbye. So far as I was concerned myself, I had come to port, but I had still Alan, to whom I was so much beholden, on my hands, and I felt besides a heavy charge in the matter of the murder and James of the Glens. On both these heads I unbosomed to Rankeeler the next morning, walking to and fro about 6 o'clock before the house of Shaw's, and with nothing in view but the fields and woods that had been my ancestors' and were now mine. Even as I spoke on these grave subjects, my eye would take a glad bit of run over prospect, and my heart jump with pride. About my clear duty to my friend, the lawyer had no doubt. I must help him out of the county at whatever risk. But in the case of James, he was of a different mind. "Mr. Thompson," says he, "is one thing, Mr. Thompson's kinsman quite another. I know little of the facts, but I gather that a great noble, whom we will call, if you like, the D of A, 36, has some concern, and is even supposed to feel some animosity in the matter. The D of A is doubtless an excellent nobleman, but Mr. David, timeo conociere Deos. If you interfere to balk his vengeance, you should remember there is one way to shut your testimony out, and that is to put you in the dock. There, you would be in the same pickle as Mr. Thompson's kinsman. You will object that you are innocent. Well, but so is he, and to be tried for your life before a Highland jury, on a Highland quarrel, and with a Highland judge upon the bench, would be a brief transition to the gallows. 36, the Duke of Argyle. Now I had made all these reasonings before and found no very good reply to them, so I put on all the simplicity I could. "In that case, sir," said I would just have to be hanged, would I not?" "My dear boy," cries he, "go in God's name, and do what you think is right. It is a poor thought that at my time of life I should be advising you to choose the safe and shameful, and I take it back with an apology. Go and do your duty, and be hanged, if you must, like a gentleman. There are worse things in the world than to be hanged." "Not many, sir," said I, smiling. "Why, yes, sir," he cried, "very many, and it would be 10 times better for your uncle to go no farther afield, if he were dangling decently upon a gibbet." Thereupon he turned into the house, still in a great fervor of mind, so that I saw I had pleased him heartily, and there he wrote me 2 letters, making his comments on them as he wrote. "This," says he, "is to my bankers, the British Linen Company, placing a credit to your name. Consult Mr. Thompson, he will know a ways, and you with this credit can supply the means. I trust you will be a good husband of your money, but in the affair of a friend like Mr. Thompson, I would be even prodigal. Then for his kinsman, there is no better way than that you should seek the advocate, tell him your tale, and offer testimony. Whether he may take or not is quite another matter, and will turn on the D of A. Now, that you may reach the Lord Advocate well recommended, I give you here a letter to a namesake of your own, the learned Mr. Balfour Pilrig, a man whom I esteem. It will look better that you should be presented by one of your own name, and the Laird of Pilrig is much looked up to in the faculty, and stands well with Lord Advocate Grant. I would not trouble him, if I were you, with any particulars, and do you know, I think it would be needless to refer to Mr. Thompson. Form yourself upon the Laird. He is a good model. When you deal with the advocate, be discreet, and in all these matters may the Lord guide you, Mr. David. Thereupon he took his farewell, and set out with Torrance for the ferry, while Alan and I turned our faces for the city of Edinburgh. As we went by the footpath and beside the gateposts in the unfinished lodge, we kept looking back at the house of my fathers. It stood there, bare and great and smokeless, like a place not lived in. Only one of the top windows, there was a peak of a nightcap bobbing up and down and back and forward, like the head of a rabbit from a burrow. I had little welcome when I came, and less kindness while I stayed, but at least I was watched as I went away. Alan and I went slowly forward upon our way, having little heart either to walk or speak. The same thought was uppermost in both, that we were near the time of our parting, and remembrance of all the bygone days sate upon us sorely. We talked indeed of what should be done, and was resolved that Alan should keep to the county, biding now here and now there, but coming once in a day to a particular place where I might be able to communicate with him, either in my own person or by messenger. In the meanwhile, I was to seek out a lawyer, who was an Appin steward, and a man therefore to be wholly trusted, and it should be his part to find a ship and to arrange for Alan's safe embarkation. No sooner was this business done than the word seemed to leave us, and though I would seek to jest with Alan under the name of Mr. Thompson, and he with me on my new clothes and my estate, you could feel very well that we were nearer tears and laughter. We came the byway over the hill of Christorfen, and when we got near the place called Rest and Be Thankful, and looked down on Christorfen bogs and over to the city and the castle on the hill, we both stopped, for we both knew without a word said that we had come to where our ways parted. Here he repeated to me once again what had been agreed upon between us, the address of the lawyer, the daily hour at which Alan might be found, and the signals that were to be made by any that came seeking him. Then I gave what money I had, a guinea or two of rankillers, so he should not starve in the meanwhile, and then we stood a space and looked over at Edinburgh in silence. "Well, good-bye," said Alan, and held out his left hand. "Well, good-bye," said Alan, and held out his left hand. "Good-bye," said I, and gave the hand a little grasp, and went off downhill. Neither one of us looked the other in the face, nor so long as he was in my view did I take one back glance at the friend I was leaving. But as I went on my way to the city, I felt so lost and lonesome that I could have found it in my heart to sit down by the dike and cry and weep like any baby. It was coming near noon when I passed in by the West Kirk and the Grass Market into the streets of the capital. The huge height of the buildings, running up to 10 and 15 stories, the narrow arched entries that continually vomited passengers, the wares of the merchants in their windows, the hubbub and endless stir, the foul smells and the fine clothes, and 100 other particulars too small to mention, struck me into a kind of stupor of surprise, so that I let the crowd carry me to and fro. And yet all the time what I was thinking was Alan at Rest and Be Thankful, and all the time, although you would think I would not choose but be delighted with these broths and novelties, there was a cold gnawing in my inside, like a remorse for something wrong. The hand of Providence brought me in my drifting to the very doors of the British Linen Company's bank.